If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 21, Street Battle. Bang. The motorcycle that had been revving up to escape suddenly made a loud noise as it was engulfed by Metagross's psychic, causing the engine to shut down immediately. The two men on the bike realized what had happened, glared viciously at Stephen and Johan, and then sprinted toward a nearby alley. Johan. Watching the robbers about to disappear into the alley, Stephen's expression changed, and he quickly shouted, "Johan-sensei, help me." Oh. Johan didn't refuse, but his method of helping left Stephen momentarily stunned. He calmly pulled out his phone and dialed the police. "Hello, Rustboro Police, this is Officer Jenny speaking." The stern voice came through the phone. "Officer Jenny, hello. There's a robbery on 6th Street. Stephen." Seeing the robbers about to vanish into the maze of alleys, Stephen didn't wait any longer. He and Metagross quickly gave chase. Watching Stephen run off, Johan couldn't help but sigh. Sigh, impulsive, hot-blooded youngsters. But then again, Stephen wasn't yet the future Hone champion who could command the Elite Four and strategize with impeccable precision. Despite his words, Johan begrudgingly began running after him. After all, as a teacher, he couldn't just stand by and let his student face two criminals alone, right? There were plenty of people watching, and more than a few had their phones out. If it got posted online, he'd probably become famous by the next day. Both of them chased the robbers into the alley. "Johan-sensei," Stephen said, his face lighting up with relief, as if he had known all along that Johan wouldn't abandon him. But Johan didn't respond to him. Instead, his attention was focused on the direction the robbers had disappeared. Gastly. Caca. Understanding Johan's signal, Gastly floated out from him, turning into a mist and slipping through the walls. Caca. Before long, Gastly's voice echoed back, prompting Johan to pick up his pace. They quickly reached the first corner but saw the robbers vanish in another direction. This cat-and-mouse game continued as they weaved through 3 or 4 more alley turns. By now, they had entered an unfamiliar part of the city. Johan frowned, slowing his pace. Noticing the change in pace, Stephen looked over, puzzled. "Did you notice they're leading us somewhere on purpose?" Johan asked. Stephen blinked in surprise. He wasn't stupid after thinking about it, he quickly realized something was off. It did seem like every time they turned a corner, the robbers were just barely out of sight, not too far ahead to lose them but not close enough to catch either. And the robbers were clearly more familiar with this labyrinth of alleys than they were. But why? Why would they lead us somewhere? Stephen asked. Johan shot him a glance. Us? More likely, they were targeting you. Tap tap tap. Sure enough, faint footsteps echoed from behind them in the narrow alley. Coo. Metagross floated protectively behind Stephen and Johan, but in the tight space of the alley, its large body had limited mobility. Let's move. Johan took a deep breath and started running again. This place was too restrictive for Stephen's Pokémon, which put them at a disadvantage. Understanding Johan's point, Stephen followed, running alongside Metagross. Instead of continuing to chase after the robbers, they ran in the opposite direction from where the robbers had fled. At the same time. Damn it! The footsteps behind them quickened, seemingly irritated at being discovered so early. Going after the Devon Corporation heir in Rustboro City? They sure are bold, Johan muttered. Stephen smiled wryly. Devon Corporation wasn't some local gang or mafia. But something else bothered him. Judging by Johan's tone, it sounded like he already knew who was behind this. As they dashed through 2 more alleyways, Johan suddenly came to a stop. They're here. Just as he spoke, a noise echoed from up ahead. My hyena, bite. Awoo. With a fearsome growl, a large, black-furred hyena with glowing red eyes darted out from a corner, charging at them with alarming speed. Metagross, bullet punch. Stephen instantly made the right call. While Metagross was generally slower, bullet punch gave it a priority boost, allowing it to strike first and counter the hyena's attack. Bang, bang, bang. Though the hyena appeared fierce, its raw strength was no match for Metagross, which sent the dark-type Pokémon flying with rapid, powerful punches. But soon after, another noise came from behind them. Zangoose, quick attack. A Zangoose, marked with a crimson slash pattern, dashed toward them, leaving a trail of silver light as it zoomed straight for them. However, just as the cramped alley restricted Metagross's movements, it also limited Zangoost's agility. It could only charge in a straight line with its quick attack. Reacting just as quickly, Johan gave his command. Gastly. Caw. A swirling black mist emerged from the wall, forming a grotesque ghostly face with a wicked grin and a long, crimson tongue darting toward the approaching Zangoose. Scary face. In a tight, dark alley like this, Gastly's massive, sudden appearance was genuinely terrifying. But the quick attack was already in motion, and Zangoose slammed right into the ghostly face. Pop! A hole ripped through the spectral face, but it quickly reformed, unaffected by the impact. The long tongue lashed out in front of the Zangoose. Zangoost's pupil shrank, its fur standing on end as it let out a startled yelp. A flinch? No, normal type moves couldn't touch a ghost type, and the reverse was true as well. But while the physical effect was nullified, the psychological impact thanks to the environment and the element of surprise was amplified. Johan glanced at Steven but said nothing. He didn't need to, Steven had already realized what to do. Metagross lunged forward with bullet punch, striking Zangoose squarely and knocking it out cold. Caw. Gastly chuckled mischievously before dissolving into the wall once more as its ghostly face faded. While the narrow alley limited the movement of both sides, it was Gastly's playground. Following Johan's directions, Gastly had already mapped out the surrounding area. And now, it had found the weakest point in the enemy's formation. Caw. Hearing a faint sound, Johan's spirits lifted. This way. He darted off in the same direction Zangoose had come from. Without hesitation, Steven followed Johan, trusting him implicitly, with Metagross in tow. As they rounded a corner, Steven saw two men collapsed on the ground, foaming at the mouth and twitching slightly. One of them appeared to be Zangoose's trainer. Steven! Caw. Gastly's eerie laughter echoed from the wall. Those videos hadn't been a waste of time. Turns out, Agatha had the right idea. Why bother fighting a Pokémon when you can take out the trainer? Their adversaries clearly hadn't expected such a wild card like Johan to ruin their ambush. They quickly passed through two more alleys until the neon lights of the main street came into view. But then, a deep, guttural voice boomed from behind them. Camerupt, flamethrower. In the dim alley, a small flame flickered to life like a star, growing brighter and brighter as it surged forward. The entire alley was soon bathed in a fiery orange glow. Cool. Metagross tensed up. It could sense that this Camerupt was far stronger than the previous Mewtwo and Zangoose. Wee woo. Suddenly, the shrill sound of sirens pierced the air, causing the trainer and his Camerupt to pause momentarily. Chapter 22, I, Gastly, am the god of alley fights. Calling the police was the right choice. If you ever encounter something like this again, trust in us at the League Police. Outside the Rustboro police station, Officer Jenny spoke sternly to Johan and Steven, who had just finished giving their statements. She then turned and walked back into the building. Johan and Steven exchanged glances. Both couldn't help but recall the events that had just transpired. Back then, Camerupt's flamethrower was already prepared to launch, and its power clearly surpassed that of Steven's Metagross. With the type disadvantage, combined with the tight alley environment, once the attack was unleashed, dodging would have been nearly impossible. Luckily, Officer Jenny had arrived just in time, scaring the attackers off. Thanks, Johan-sensei, Steven said sincerely. At first, Steven had thought Johan's decision to call the police seemed a bit out of place. After all, given the situation, by the time Officer Jenny and her team arrived, the robbers would have likely gotten away. But now, in hindsight, Johan's decision to call the authorities had been incredibly wise. Johan waved his hand thoughtfully, brushing off the thanks. The two walked side by side. The neon lights still illuminated the busy streets, loudly proclaiming the vibrancy of Rustboro City. But if one looked closely, they would notice that behind this dazzling brilliance, there were always one or two dark alleys stretching endlessly into the shadows, whispering secrets hidden beneath the city's splendor. Sensei, do you know who they were? Steven finally asked after walking for a while. Johan didn't stop, carrying the bag of energy cubes he had bought earlier, his eyes scanning the street as if searching for something. At the same time, he replied with a question of his own, aren't you curious? Hey! Steven looked puzzled. Johan's eyes brightened as he finally found his target. He crossed the street, which wasn't too busy with traffic, and headed toward a rather unremarkable-looking restaurant. Only then did he continue, Dark-type Mewtwo, Fire, and Ground-type Camerupt, and the Quick Zangoose. You're saying? Steven began to catch on. Metagross, being Steel and Psychic type, had weaknesses to Dark, Fire, and Ground types. Moreover, the narrow alley wasn't favorable for Metagross to fight. It would make Metagross, already not the most agile Pokémon, even more sluggish. Steven might not even have had the space to summon another Pokémon. While Steven was lost in thought, Johan had already lifted the curtain of the restaurant and walked inside. Behind the counter, a middle-aged man in a chef's outfit greeted him with a smile. Hey, Johan. The usual. Johan glanced at Steven, who had followed him in. Make it 2 orders. Got it. The two headed to the back of the small restaurant, where several private booths were separated by curtains. They found an empty one, ducked inside, and sat down. Only after they were seated did Steven press on, so they were targeting me. Johan shrugged and didn't answer directly. Instead, he said, this place has great pork cutlet bowls, and the tempura is fried to perfection. Caca. Gastly floated out from Johan's clothes, holding a fork it had somehow gotten its hands on, and looked eager to dig in. Dinner had long passed, and after the fight in the alley, Gastly was starving. It felt like it could eat an entire Tauros. But why? What was their goal? Steven asked again. This time, Johan's calm gaze met Steven's. His eyes were like a still pond, with only faint ripples disturbing the surface, yet they radiated an undeniable tranquility. Steven stopped mid-question. Here you go, 2 pork cutlet bowls and tempura. The chef broke the brief silence as he brought over the steaming dishes, filling the booth with the tantalizing aroma of freshly fried food. There were 5 full meals in total. The delicious scent quickly filled the small space. Caca. As soon as the chef left, Gastly's eyes lit up, and drool nearly escaped from its mouth. It grabbed the fork and eagerly began devouring its food. Johan also started eating. After a few bites, he noticed that Steven hadn't touched his meal. Not to your liking. No, it's fine, Steven snapped out of his thoughts, quickly assuring Johan as he picked up his chopsticks. He hadn't eaten dinner either, and though he usually ate more gracefully, tonight was different. By the time Johan had finished one meal, Gastly was already on its 3rd bowl. What surprised Johan even more was that Steven had also finished his portion fairly quickly and cleaned his plate spotless. There was no trace of the typical Devonair's demeanor, he even neatly placed his chopsticks on the plate when he finished. Burp. Gastly let out a loud burp, flopping lazily onto a cushion, its eyes swirling in satisfaction. It was clear that the little ghost was in absolute bliss. The food is really good, Steven admitted, finally letting go of his earlier concerns. He couldn't help but praise the meal. For Steven, a lover of high-quality food, to compliment the chef's cooking showed just how skilled the restaurant owner was. Afterward, Steven turned to Gastly and said earnestly, "Thanks for your help tonight, Gastly. Without Gastly scouting the area and knocking out several enemies, they wouldn't have gotten through the night so smoothly." Caca. Gastly froze. Was I just thanked? It was the first time anyone besides Johan had thanked Gastly. The little ghost felt shy. Caca caca. The black mist around Gastly swirled, unsure whether it was blushing or boasting. "I, Gastly, am the god of alley fights." Gastly. Both Johan and Steven burst into laughter. "Sensei, I've thought it through," Steven said seriously after the laughter died down. "Those people were clearly after me. I've never made enemies, so it must be because of my last name or more specifically, because of Devon. Other than Camerupt, the rest of their Pokémon weren't particularly strong, but they clearly knew a lot about me." It was only now that Steven realized Johan's earlier silence had been deliberate, giving him time to think for himself. And from Steven's perspective, Johan had been dragged into this incident. He should have known more than Johan about who their enemies were, as the primary target. Steven's analysis was methodical. His final conclusion was that whoever had set this trap likely had a grudge against Devon Corporation, but there wasn't enough information to pinpoint exactly who. "Well done." Johan smiled, standing up and patting Steven on the shoulder. "Steven, you have great potential. You know a lot about Pokémon, people, and even different kinds of stones. This will make you an excellent trainer, a capable Devonair, and a brilliant stone collector." Johan propped his hand against the door frame, lifting the curtain as he stepped out. His words filled Stephen with pride and joy. But, you don't know yourself well enough yet. You don't realize how great you can be. You're capable of excelling as a top-tier trainer, a Devon heir, and a stone collector, without having to choose or make compromises. That part Johan didn't say out loud. It was a bit too soon for Stephen to fully grasp that idea. After Johan and Gastly left, Stephen sat quietly for a long time. Whew! Stephen exhaled deeply, a new brightness in his eyes. Not knowing myself well enough, hey. He had a feeling that Johan could help him understand himself better. But that was something for the future, something that couldn't be rushed. As he left the restaurant, Stephen's thoughts lingered. Still, I need to find a way to properly thank Johan-sensei for tonight and for helping with Metagross earlier. But how? Money? Stephen immediately shook his head. No, he shouldn't cheapen his gratitude with material things. Suddenly, an idea struck him, and his eyes lit up. At that moment, the restaurant owner called out from behind him. Sir, are you paying for your meal? Stephen. Chapter 23, Got a Boost? The next morning, Johan was woken up by Gastly's excited cries. Caw-caw, caw-caw. Johan opened his eyes to find Gastly hugging his old, beat-up laptop, which seemed to be streaming a live Pokémon battle. Johan rubbed his head and dragged himself out of bed. After pouring himself a glass of water and taking a sip, he felt much more awake. Curious, he walked over to see what Gastly was watching. Pfft! Even though Johan was prepared for anything, be it Gastly watching a horror movie to study scare techniques, or complaining about a boring battle, what he saw on the screen was not what he expected. On the screen, was a milker milking a Miltank. Caw-caw. Gastly squealed in surprise as Johan spat out his water in a burst of laughter, drenching it. Yet again, he had been attacked from behind. Gastly glared at Johan with mock fury. Wait, hold up, Johan said, wiping his mouth. Is this really what you're into? Moo. The sound of a very content Miltank echoed from the laptop. Time seemed to freeze for a few seconds. Caw-caw. Caw-caw. Gastly pointed to the corner of the screen, where a line of text appeared, Moo Moo Milk make your Pokémon healthier. So it was just a Moo Moo Milk commercial. My bad, I didn't notice, Johan said, sounding anything but apologetic. Even if it was an ad, why was Gastly so hyped? Gastly looked frustrated and clicked the refresh button, replaying the commercial. Since they didn't have a membership, every time they watched a video, they had to sit through ads. Just as Gastly was getting to the good part, the episode had ended, and the ad popped up out of nowhere. Ahem, Johan coughed. You know, it's funny how people with money pay for premium, while the rest of us have to waste time on ads. Isn't that a waste of time for those without money? Caw-caw, caw-caw. Gastly immediately latched onto the new topic, nodding seriously in agreement. Exactly, exactly. But then, being the crafty Pokémon it was, Gastly quickly redirected the conversation. Caw-caw. It made a dramatic spitting motion, criticizing Johan for spitting water on it without brushing his teeth first. All right, Johan raised his hands in surrender. You just want to try Moo Moo Milk, right? I'll order some for you. After spending so much time with Gastly, Johan knew its little tricks by now. Gastly, Omega. Shaking his head, Johan pulled out his phone and quickly scrolled through some options, stopping when he reached his bank account. Guess I gave Stephen too much credit, he couldn't even catch the obvious hint. Yesterday, he had praised Stephen for understanding others, but when he accidentally let Stephen dine and dash, it was his way of hinting that he was broke and could barely afford food. Caw-caw. Why didn't you just tell him directly? Johan chuckled. I'm still a teacher, you know. Asking my student for money would be disgraceful. Gastly rolled its eyes. It wasn't sure if Johan had too much pride or not enough. Good morning, Johan. Good morning, Professor Johan. As Johan walked through the academy with Gastly, he couldn't help but notice that far more people were greeting him today than usual. Still, he smiled and greeted everyone back. But by the time he returned to his counseling office, Johan's confusion had only grown deeper. He knew where he stood. As a Pokémon psychology professor, he was basically invisible at Rustboro Academy, a teacher that most people didn't even know existed. So why were so many people greeting him today? Apparently, even returning to his office didn't solve this mystery. Gastly, equally puzzled, didn't dwell on it. After all, it was too busy pacing excitedly around the room. Earlier that morning, after some cute pleading, and a bit of manipulation, Gastly had convinced Johan to order a case of moo milk, which would arrive that evening. Now, all it wanted was for time to pass faster. Caw-caw, caw-caw. Meanwhile, Johan made himself a cup of coffee, sat at his desk, and opened his laptop. He navigated to the Pokémon League's official site, schemed a few news headlines, and logged into his account. He wanted to see if Mewtwo had replied. However, as soon as he logged in, his computer started beeping wildly, as though it was about to crash. Caw-caw. Gastly floated over to take a look. Johan was equally surprised. Did Mewtwo actually trace him through the network? But when he clicked on the notifications, he realized it wasn't a response from Mewtwo at all, it was a flood of comments on the research paper he had published. Hey! Now that he thought about it, his paper had been published for some time, but it had mostly gone unnoticed, with very few comments. That was expected. Johan wasn't a well-known professor or even an official researcher yet, so it wasn't surprising that few people had seen his work. But now, the comment count was stuck at 999 plus, and the number kept climbing. What on earth was going on? First, Johan muted the notification sound, which had been blaring non-stop. Feeling even more confused, he didn't rush to check the comments. Instead, he went straight to the researchers' forum. To his astonishment, his paper had been pinned to the front page, listed as the 6th most popular paper, the potential link between Pokémon personalities and stat growth. Did I get a boost? Otherwise, how could an unnoticed paper suddenly shoot up to become one of the most popular? This also explained why so many people had greeted him that morning. It was likely because of the paper's newfound fame. Johan clicked on the paper. As he scrolled through the page, he soon saw the top comment, which had been highlighted due to its high number of likes. This is an interesting direction, but the paper lacks solid numerical evidence to back it up. If the issue is access to equipment, I may be able to help. Samuel Oak. What? Johan blinked. Professor Oak? No wonder the paper had suddenly gained so much traction. The renowned Professor Oak had left a positive comment on his paper, sparking a flood of discussions among trainers and researchers alike. As one of the most influential figures in the Pokémon world, Professor Oak's words carried immense weight. Even a simple comment from him had caused a surge in attention. The sudden popularity of the paper also drew more attention to Johan's previously obscure Johan's Pokémon Psychology Consultation Room, which had previously seen only Mewtwo as a visitor. Suddenly, more people were asking questions. Lil Growlithe, my Pokémon isn't eating, is this a psychological problem? Eevee loves cabbage, hello, sorry to bother you. How do I help my Pokémon overcome its deep-seated insecurity? Math Magician, should humans really coexist with Pokémon? Questions like these were popping up left and right. Chapter 24, The Money Tree. After a bit of fiddling, Johan finally managed to temporarily mute the constant stream of comment notifications from his computer. He skimmed through some of the comments. To be honest, most of the people commenting were just there to check it out because of Professor Oak's comment. After all, not everyone had the patience to study Pokémon psychology. Still, this surge of attention managed to activate his previously quiet online consultation room. Compared to the comments under the research paper, Johan was more interested in the people who came to consult him. For him, these were valuable observational samples. However, some of the inquiries left him speechless. Like the person asking if a Pokémon refusing to eat was a psychological issue, or the one asking whether humans and Pokémon should coexist. Some questions were far too simple, while others were ridiculously profound. If Johan didn't already know Mewtwo's username, he might have suspected that the user called Math Magician was Mewtwo in disguise. In comparison, the user Eevee eats cabbage asking how to handle an overly insecure Pokémon seemed like a more reasonable psychological issue. Since he finally had so many people consulting him, Johan decided to seize this opportunity to make a name for himself, replying to each inquiry in the hopes of building his reputation. After all, this would be useful when he opened his own Pokémon psychology clinic in the future. Grain in the field, if your Pokémon isn't eating and it's not full, could it be that the food isn't to its taste? That first question was simple enough. For the third question, Johan decided to flip it back to the asker. People who posed such deep questions likely already had their own ideas. It might be more useful to let them express those thoughts first. Grain in the field, if humans and Pokémon shouldn't coexist, how do you think they should interact? As for the second question. Grain in the field, insecurity can arise from various causes, such as physical factors, past experiences, environment, or psychological reasons. The user's little Growlithe and Math Magician didn't respond, but EV Eats Cabbage quickly replied again. EV Eats Cabbage, I think, it might be a combination of all of those. Online 24/7. Hey. Johan didn't expect such a quick response. After some thought, he began typing again. Grain in the field, that's a bit tricky, but no matter how many issues are involved, there's always a core problem. If we can identify and solve that, the other issues should resolve themselves. Considering Mewtwo's previous misunderstanding, he added another question for clarification. Grain in the field, could you show me what kind of Pokémon it is? A photo arrived quickly, seemingly taken in real time on a phone. However, when Johan saw the Pokémon in the picture, he fell silent. Surrounded by greenery, in a pool of crystal clear water, was a fish-like Pokémon. Its body was mostly a dull brown, with several rough patches on its skin. Its fins and tail were light blue, though they appeared a bit ragged. Its expression looked dull and listless. It was a water-type Pokémon Phoebus. Johan. He stared at the image of the Phoebus for a long time, unsure of what to say. If someone asked which Pokémon was the most insecure, Phoebus would undoubtedly rank first. Well, maybe only the Pokémon that could see through everything would rival it. But curing Phoebus's insecurity, that was going to be extremely difficult. Johan even wondered if the person was deliberately trying to challenge him. As if noticing Johan's long silence, the user sent another message. EV Eats Cabbage, is there a way? Johan took a deep breath. Grain in the field, yes. EV Eats Cabbage, really? Grain in the field, it will be challenging. It'll require a combination of psychological treatment and physical intervention. But considering your situation, we'll have to focus on physical methods first. Try feeding it a bitter-flavored berry, like an apricot berry, and observe its reaction before we decide on the next step. EV Eats Cabbage, got it, thanks. The user quickly logged off, likely to search for an apricot berry, leaving Johan massaging his temples. Curing Phoebus's insecurity? There was really only one way to do that, evolve it. In the games, Phoebus could evolve in two ways: by increasing its beauty stat to 170 or by holding a prism scale and being traded. But in the real world, considering how difficult it was to obtain a prism scale, and unsure of the user's financial situation, Johan chose the more reliable method, increasing Phoebus's beauty stat. The reason he suggested using the bitter-tasting apricot berry was that improving beauty required feeding Phoebus bitter poke blocks or poffins. Johan needed to see if this Phoebus could tolerate bitter flavors first. Gastly definitely couldn't tolerate them. Moreover, using the method of slowly increasing beauty would feel more like a gradual treatment. If things went well, perhaps Johan could even write a paper on the topic on Phoebus's evolution into melodic. Ding ding! Just as Johan was about to log off and take Gastly for training, a new message popped up. EV Eats Cabbage, sorry, I forgot to ask about the consultation fee. Consultation fee? Johan's eyes brightened. Right, he wasn't offering free services to Academy students here. This wasn't volunteer work. However, since the effectiveness of this treatment was still unknown, Johan hesitated. He didn't want to ruin his reputation before he even had the chance to build it. EV Eats Cabbage, I found your account info. Sorry, money's a bit tight recently, so it took a while. I hope this amount is enough. If not, I'll send more next time. Since league accounts usually required full details, finding Johan's bank information wasn't difficult. Johan stared at the message on his phone. Your account has received 20,000 poke dollars. Your remaining balance, 45,000 poke dollars. Silently, he deleted the message he had typed out saying, let's wait and see how things turn out first. They gave a lot. Mewtwo, take note. And this was just for an initial consultation. There would be follow-up treatments later on. This is exactly why I want to open my own Pokémon psychology clinic, Johan thought to himself. Looking at the now offline EV Eats Cabbage account, it felt like he was staring at a money tree, its branches jingling with coins. Gastly! Johan suddenly called out. Caca! Gastly jolted, startled. What now? Hand over the phone. Let's order 2 more crates of Moo Moo milk. Caca. Gastly's voice shot up 3 octaves. Really? Never skimp on your Pokemon's food. When have I ever lied to you? Johan's eyes widened playfully. Caca, Gastly pouted, full of skepticism. Last time, you told me inhaling gas more than 3 times would kill me. Johan. Was that really a lie? It wasn't until Johan placed the order for 2 more crates of Moo milk that Gastly finally believed him. Caca. Did you win the lottery or something? Johan just smiled without answering. Come on, time for your training. Gastly was brimming with enthusiasm. Indeed, for Pokémon who loved to eat, food was one of the greatest sources of motivation. Chapter 25, Cynthia. Not bad. Your speed has improved, and your stamina is above average, Johan remarked with satisfaction as he observed the data displayed on the wall of the training facility after Gastly's session. It seems that combining Pokémon training with an ample supply of Poke Blocks is indeed effective. With a steady supply of Poke Blocks, Gastly's growth rate has noticeably increased. From Johan's perspective, Gastly had been in good condition, but there was always something he couldn't quite pinpoint. Now, with continuous training and proper nutrition, Gastly's status had returned to excellent, though it had yet to reach the pinnacle of optimal. This confirmed Johan's suspicions that Gastly didn't have any significant issues, perhaps it was simply due to its long slumber, preventing it from recovering quickly. Relieved by this conclusion, Johan exhaled softly. Caca. Having just finished a round of basic training, Gastly floated over to Johan, curious. How was it? Not bad. Johan didn't hold back. The training results were better than expected, and perhaps due to food incentives, Gastly's dedication to training had noticeably improved. Caca. Gastly let out a mischievous laugh, clearly pleased with its own progress. Next up is move training. Let's continue honing hypnosis. Johan took off his jacket and moved to the center of the training grounds with Gastly. As a Pokémon psychologist, Johan didn't claim expertise in all areas, but when it came to hypnosis, he undoubtedly had more knowledge than Gastly. This training had already been underway for a few days, and the results were promising. During their encounter the night before, when Darius saw people foaming at the mouth and twitching in unconsciousness, that was the effect of Gastly's hypnosis. Typically, Pokémon use hypnosis to put their opponent to sleep, buying time for further moves, whether launching a powerful attack, inflicting status effects, or switching out a Pokémon. But Johan believed that this use of hypnosis was too basic. Who said hypnosis had to be purely a restricting move with no potential for causing harm? Psychological harm is still harm. While most Pokémon's hypnosis aimed to lull the opponent into a quick sleep, Gastly's hypnosis sought to extend the time the opponent remained in a hypnotic state. This prolonged period within their mind could feel far longer than it actually was, amplifying the potential for psychological trauma. Moreover, Gastly's love for scaring others made this approach align perfectly with its nature. Gastly was highly motivated to learn, even though many of Johan's technical terms flew right over its head. But that didn't matter. When it came to hypnosis, Johan could teach Gastly hands-on. All right, hit me with hypnosis, Johan said, relaxing his body and signaling to Gastly. Caca. Gastly didn't hesitate. After several attempts, it was certain that its hypnosis couldn't really affect Johan. He could always immediately recognize when he was inside a dream. In truth, the real risk wasn't Johan being hypnotized, it was Gastly itself. A few seconds later, Johan opened his eyes with a thoughtful expression. You've made progress, but it's still not enough. Try my method now. Remember, the fear of the unknown is the real fear. Once a fear becomes reality, it's something that can be adapted to. Having a Pokémon psychologist test hypnosis on himself might be a one-of-a-kind experience in the entire Pokémon world. Sinnoh Region, Celestic Town. At the Rowan Research Lab. A stern-looking man with a bushy mustache, graying hair slicked back with gel, and dressed immaculately in a shirt, blue vest, and tie, was carefully observing a few combi in the garden, seemingly studying their evolution into Vespiquen. Suddenly, a graceful figure hurried past him. Golden hair that shone like sunlight cascaded down her back. A sleek black coat hugged her figure, accentuating her curves, and her sharp eyes gleamed beneath a flawless face. Walking by her side was a shark-like Pokémon, Garchomp, who kept pace with her every step. Cynthia. The elderly professor, Rowan, called out, surprised to see her in such a rush. It wasn't often that Cynthia, usually calm and composed, showed such urgency. Normally, she was the type to take her time with everything, even spending an hour deciding on an ice cream flavor. Professor Rowan, Cynthia stopped abruptly, bowing slightly in respect. I'm sorry, I didn't see you there. Professor Rowan waved it off, unconcerned, but curious. I thought you had a battle today. It's already over, Cynthia replied. Rowan glanced at his watch. 11:33 a.m. The battle had started at 11 o'clock sharp. Considering half an hour for travel and miscellaneous things like entering and exiting the stadium, the whole battle had lasted 2 minutes? Or just 1 minute? A 3-on-3 battle? He looked at Cynthia's Garcomp again, shaking his head. No, it was probably a 1-on-3. What's this about? Rowan's attention finally landed on the basket Garcomp was holding. Inside were several gleaming, translucent apricot berries. Well, Cynthia briefly explained how she had consulted with a Pokémon psychologist online named Grain in the Field about treating her Phoebus's insecurity. Oh! Professor Rowan was intrigued. As Sinnoh's foremost Pokémon professor, he had never heard of a treatment for Phoebus's insecurity. A Phoebus that wasn't insecure, would it even be a Phoebus anymore? Curiosity piqued, Rowan followed Cynthia to a small pond in the research lab's backyard. The clear water was home to many Pokémon, Piplup, Bibarel, Shellos, Poliwag, Marill, and more. But in the corner of the pond, a lone Phoebus floated quietly, its expression dull. Noticing Cynthia's presence, the Phoebus's eyes lit up briefly, but upon seeing Rowan nearby, it quickly lowered its head again. Cynthia had caught this Phoebus during her first journey as a child, back when her Garcomp was still a Gibble. Many had advised her to give up on training Phoebus, but Cynthia remained steadfast in her decision. Over the years, she'd tried various ways to treat Phoebus's insecurity, but no one could provide a real solution. So when she heard from Grain in the Field about a potential treatment, she couldn't wait to try it out. Her opponent from this morning's battle had suffered greatly as a result. Don't be afraid, Cynthia spoke softly, kneeling down and pulling out an apricot berry. Try this. Bloop bloop. Under Cynthia's gentle encouragement, the Phoebus slowly emerged from the water, blowing a few bubbles before taking a small bite of the berry. The tart flavor immediately filled its mouth, causing it to shudder. It might taste a little bitter, but stick with. Cynthia's voice trailed off as her eyes widened in surprise. Phoebus, usually timid and reluctant, actually appeared pleased by the berry's flavor. It even took another small bite of the sour apricot berry. Could this really be working? Cynthia glanced at Professor Rowan for confirmation. The professor looked deep in thought. Sensing her gaze, Rowan finally spoke. For now, I can't say whether this will completely cure Phoebus's insecurity. But it's clear that Phoebus doesn't dislike the apricot berry, on the contrary, it seems to enjoy it. Plus, it already seems more lively. As a renowned expert in Pokémon evolution, Professor Rowan's assessment was always precise and measured. But even he couldn't hide his surprise. Could it be that apricot berries had the power to treat a Pokémon's insecurities? Or? He wasn't entirely sure. However, after Phoebus finished the entire berry, its newfound energy was undeniable. This change was already a significant improvement for Cynthia, dispelling any lingering doubts or skepticism she might have had. Oh, right, Professor Rowan suddenly said, what was the name of that person you consulted with? Grain in the Field. They recently published a paper that even Professor Oak commented on, Cynthia explained. Chapter 26, The Autumn Outing, Part 1. Caw. I am fear. I am the end of the world. Gulp gulp gulp. With a giant gulp, Gastly downed a large mouthful of moo milk. Johan watched this scene with exasperation. If only he could hit Gastly, he'd definitely give it a flick on the head. Unlike other Gastly, which were lethargic during the day and lively at night, his Gastly snored louder than him at night and became incredibly hyperactive by morning. Completely oblivious to Johan's glare from behind, Gastly continued clutching the half-full bottle of moo milk in its gaseous hands, eyes gleaming as it glanced at the 3 boxes stacked in the corner. Gastly felt like this was peak happiness, true bliss in its ghostly life. All right, there's going to be plenty of tasty treats from now on, Johan said, bread hanging from his mouth. He casually grabbed a bottle of moo milk from the box, opened it, and took a sip. His eyes brightened. He had to admit, the flavor was really good, sweet but not too rich, with an added refreshing effect. No wonder so many trainers and Pokémon were crazy about this milk. Caw. Gastly stared blankly at Johan. My milk. Noticing Gastly's mournful gaze, Johan paused and then sheepishly replied, I was in a rush this morning and didn't have time to make breakfast, so I drank one bottle. I'll make it up to you with a whole box next time, okay? Caca. Hopefully. Johan hoisted a small black backpack onto his back, opened the door, and headed out. Today was the Academy's planned autumn outing. Since they would be gone for several days, Johan had spent the entire morning preparing for the trip, leaving no time for breakfast. Though his backpack looked small, it was packed with plenty of items, including a tent in case they needed to camp. In the world of Pokémon, space compression technology was highly advanced. From Pokeballs to backpacks, the technology had become quite sophisticated. Even Johan's seemingly unremarkable, lightweight bag could hold a lot of things. Caca. Gastly quickly finished off the remaining milk and floated after Johan. Rustboro Pokémon Academy. Several well-kept buses were already parked at the entrance to the academy. While students hadn't arrived yet, many of the teachers were waiting. Mr. Johan. A muscular middle-aged man with a buzz cut and a tight vest approached Johan with a smile. Mr. Dolph. Johan responded with his standard smile, nodding in acknowledgement. This brawny man was Dolph, the homeroom teacher for first-year Class 1 in the battling department. Dolph was once quite well known, having participated in numerous tournaments, including the Evergrande Conference, though his rankings weren't particularly high. Ms. Seiko, Ms. Shelley, Johan greeted the two female teachers who were joining them. Both responded politely. Seiko seemed familiar with Johan and greeted him warmly, while Shelley appeared more reserved. But Johan didn't mind. He preferred Shelley's cold indifference. The less attention he got from her, the better. He had no intention of getting on Team Aqua's radar. Here are the travel itineraries and some important reminders, Dolph said, handing over several sheets of paper to the three of them. He went on to briefly explain the details before smiling, I hope we can have a smooth collaboration. The four of them were the teachers in charge of Class 1's autumn outing from the battling department. Soon, the students began arriving. Johan's task was simple, checking off the names of students as they boarded the bus. Mr. Johan. Mr. Johan, I didn't expect to see you here. Stephen and Roxanne, who arrived together, were visibly surprised upon spotting Johan. Johan stared at Stephen for a few seconds. Seeing that his surprise seemed genuine, Johan abandoned the idea that Stephen might have influenced the arrangement. It appeared that Johan's participation in the autumn outing was purely the Academy's decision, a stroke of bad luck that placed him in the mix. Get on the bus, Johan waved them aboard. The two quickly complied. But just as Stephen was about to board, Johan suddenly called out, Stephen, thanks. Stephen paused for a moment, then quickly caught on, flashing a bright smile. I should be the one thanking you, Mr. Johan. Roxanne looked confused, but Johan and Stephen both understood. The rapid rise in popularity of Johan's academic paper, even earning a comment from Professor Oak, was no accident. Someone had definitely boosted it, and the one responsible was undoubtedly Stephen. Of course, Stephen hadn't blindly boosted the paper. He'd read it first and believed it was insightful and innovative. Otherwise, even with a spike in attention, the hype would have fizzled quickly. Professor Oak's comment only further validated the merit of Johan's research. That was the true reason it gained so much attention. Mr. Johan, are all the students accounted for? Dolph asked from the bus, noticing other buses had already begun to leave. One more, Johan replied, scanning the list. No sooner had the words left his mouth when... Wait for me. Clip-clop, clip-clop. The rapid sound of hooves approached. A red-haired girl rode up on a flaming pony. It was Flannery and her ponyta, the last to arrive. Johan checked off the final name on his list. The bus slowly pulled away. Their destination, Lavaridge town, nestled beneath Mt Chimney, in the heart of the Hone region. With Rustboro City and Lavaridge town being quite a distance apart, it would take several hours to get there. Class 1 wasn't very large, so there were plenty of empty seats on the bus. Johan chose to sit in the back. This allowed Gastly some room to move around without disturbing others. Where's Gastly? Johan had just settled into his seat when he suddenly realized Gastly was missing. Meanwhile, on top of the bus. Caca, too windy. Gastly. I'm shrinking. Johan. By the time Gastly floated back inside, it had shrunk to 2/3 of its usual size. It grinned sheepishly at Johan. Caw, caw. As a gaseous Pokémon, 95% of Gastly's body was made up of toxic gas, allowing it to slip into almost any space. But in the face of strong winds, if it couldn't gather enough gas, its body would shrink. Fortunately, Gastly would be back to its full size after resting for a while. At least no one had noticed Gastly's splendor. Silently, Johan stuffed the ghost back into his pocket, pulled out his phone, and casually browsed the news. Jubilife TV's Jubilife tournament wraps up as trainer Cynthia takes the crown. Garcomp dominates with a clean sweep. Video link. A massive graveler discovered outside Mowgli City, suspected to be Mowgli City? After dealing with the remnants of Greater Mowgli Holdings and the plot against Stephen, Johan had become a little sensitive to anything related to Mowgli. Mowgli City isn't too close to Mt Chimney or Lavaridge town, though. As Johan pondered, he noticed the website's chat feature blinking. Curious, he opened it. Evie eats lettuce. Phoebus seems more energetic after eating the apricot berry. Phoebus video attached. It's good it doesn't mind the sour taste. That makes things a bit easier. Johan stroked his chin thoughtfully and then replied. Grain in the field, in that case, try making poke blocks or poffins with apricot berries. The effects should be even better. But keep in mind that with only physical treatment, this could take a while and might cost a lot. Be prepared for that. Considering the person had casually transferred 20,000 poke dollars, they probably wouldn't mind spending a bit more on poke blocks. After a moment, Stephen suddenly came over from the front of the bus and sat down next to Johan. Mr. Johan, are you planning to go to the hot springs tonight? Chapter 27, The Autumn Outing, Part 2. Hone Region, Lavaridge Town. One by one, the buses parked in front of the Lavaridge Town Pokémon Center. Under the supervision of the teachers, the students slowly disembarked and began moving their luggage inside. As per the school's arrangements, the students would stay at the Pokémon Center for the first night. Each room would house 2 students, and this applied to the teachers as well. However, since there was an odd number of students in the first-year battling class, Stephen made a request for Johan to share a room with him, instead of the original arrangement where Johan would have bunked with their homeroom teacher, Dolph. Truth be told, Johan wasn't entirely thrilled about sharing a room with another man, but since it was the school's arrangement, and even the Devon Corporation heir Stephen had no objections, Johan decided he should set a good example as a teacher. Besides, compared to the muscled-up Dolph, it was much easier to accept sharing with Stephen. In addition, Johan was much closer in age to Stephen than Dolph. Once everyone settled into their rooms, Dolph announced that the afternoon and evening would be free time, much to the students' delight. Of course, free time meant they could only explore Lavaridge town itself. If anyone wanted to leave town, they needed the teacher's approval. As noon approached, the students grouped up and left the Pokémon Center to find food. Johan, too, was invited by Stephen, Roxanne, and Flannery. Mr. Johan, would you like to join us for lunch? Roxanne asked, still holding a book in her arms, even during the autumn outing. Before Johan could decline, she added, Flannery knows a great restaurant, it's one of Lavaridge town's specialties. Flannery was a native of Lavaridge town, and her grandfather, a former member of the Hone Elite Four, was currently the town's gym leader. Caw. Gastly, still shrunken down and not fully recovered from earlier, popped its head out, its eyes gleaming with interest. In the end, faced with the expectant gazes of Stephen, Roxanne, and Flannery, Johan agreed to join them. It wasn't that he was particularly tight with his money. Okay, maybe he was a little stingy. After all, he'd already dropped enough hints to Stephen once, and that was enough. Even though these 3 students were likely wealthier than him, as a teacher, it didn't feel right to let the students pay for his meal. Seeing Johan agree, Flannery exchanged a sly glance with Stephen and Roxanne, satisfied with their little success. Once they stepped out of the Pokémon Center, the heat hit them like a wave. A few more steps, and they could see a towering mountain in the distance, none other than Mt Chimney, one of Hone's iconic landmarks. Mt Chimney, a 1,500-meter tall volcano located in the heart of Hone, hadn't erupted in many years, but it continued to emit high temperatures, remaining a dormant volcano. From afar, dark volcanic ash could be seen drifting down like black snow. As it fell to a certain altitude, the ash seemed to resemble large black feathers swirling in the wind. Carried by mountain breezes, it drifted toward the northeast. It was easy to imagine how the thick volcanic ash could impact the surrounding environment. However, despite being located at the base of Mt. Chimney, Lavaridge town was on the southern side of the mountain. Thanks to the mountain winds, the ash rarely reached the town, causing minimal disturbance. Instead, the high temperatures from the dormant volcano had given Lavaridge town its famous volcanic hot springs, attracting many visitors. Is that where the non-flying one sleeps? Johan thought as he gazed at the towering, cloud-wreathed mountain. If that beast ever awoke, it would be. But he quickly dismissed the thought with a wry smile. How unlucky would someone have to be to run into Groudon on a casual trip to Mt. Chimney? Besides, Groudon was still slumbering. Without the red orb, it wouldn't wake up, even if someone danced on its head. Mr. Johan. Stephen, Roxanne, and Flannery had walked a bit ahead when they noticed Johan standing still, staring at Mt. Chimney, lost in thought. Snapping back to reality, Johan adjusted his jacket and followed them at a leisurely pace. He had to admit, Gastly was incredibly useful in this sweltering environment. Thanks to Gastly, Johan's body temperature was at least 5 degrees cooler, making the heat far more bearable. Caca. See how great I am now? In a small, relatively secluded restaurant in Lavaridge town, Gastly lay comfortably on a soft cushion, letting out a satisfied burp after the meal. Johan, who had just returned from paying the bill, couldn't help but twitch at the sight. Gastly had eaten the most out of anyone. Second place went to Flannery, who had insisted they come to this restaurant, followed by Stephen and Johan, with Roxanne eating the least. But even Johan had to admit, the food here was quite good. Especially the hot spring egg rice bowl, made with genuine volcanic hot spring eggs. Now that we're full, what should we do this afternoon? Flannery leaned back in her chair, her gaze bouncing between Johan, Stephen, and Roxanne, looking slightly bored. It was pretty clear what Flannery wanted to suggest, especially with the not-so-subtle glances she kept throwing at Stephen and Roxanne. Stephen sighed, while Roxanne turned her head away, pretending not to notice. How about we head up Mt. Chimney? Flannery suddenly slapped the table, full of energy as she continued her act. Caca. Before Johan could react, Gastly, who was feeling sleepy from the big meal, was startled out of its daze. It glared at Flannery with a suspicious look. This girl had been the one who fought the hardest over the food earlier. What do you think? I know a great spot on Mt. Chimney, and there are plenty of wild Pokémon there too. Flannery pressed on, eager to show off her local knowledge. Seeing Flannery so enthusiastic, Stephen and Roxanne felt bad about shooting her down, so they turned their hopeful gazes toward Johan. Johan, however, remained unfazed. He calmly sipped his tea before replying, the free activity zone is limited to Lavaridge town. Mt. Chimney isn't included. As long as we get your approval, we're good to go. That's why I'm asking you, Mr. Johan, Flannery pleaded, still hopeful. No. Johan's refusal was swift and firm. I promise it's not dangerous. No. It's not far from Lavaridge town. I used to go there all the time when I was younger. No. No matter how much Flannery begged, Johan's answer remained a calm but unwavering no. Her stubbornness was clearly starting to wear thin. I'll introduce you to my best friend. She's super pretty. Flannery finally resorted to her trump card. No wait, what? Johan froze, and even Stephen and Roxanne were taken aback. Ahem, still no, Johan coughed lightly, regaining his composure. You don't even know who my friend is. She's Flannery stomped her foot in frustration. Fine. I challenge you to a battle. If I win, you let us go up the mountain. Then she quickly added, you're not scared, are you? Johan chuckled. That won't work on me. Flannery scratched her head in frustration. When she finally ran out of ideas, she pouted and muttered, fine, if you won't agree, we'll just sneak out later. No one would even notice. That, however, did have an effect. Johan turned to Stephen. Stephen, do you want to go up the mountain too? Caught in Johan's gaze, Stephen hesitated before sheepishly admitting, I heard there's a rare type of volcanic stone up there. Johan sighed and turned back to Flannery, his tone calm. All right, I'll accept your challenge. If you win, you can go up the mountain. But if you lose, you'll have to listen to me. However, as you know, I'm just an ordinary Pokémon psychology teacher, and my Gastly was only recently caught. You wouldn't want to be accused of bullying the weak, would you? Hearing this, Roxanne and Stephen exchanged a glance, both inwardly thinking, this won't end well. Before they could warn her, Flannery confidently puffed out her chest and declared, "No problem. I also have a Pokémon I just caught recently." Smack! Both Steven and Roxanne facepalmed at the same time. Flannery hadn't fallen for Johan's reverse psychology, but she had walked right into his trap. Caca. Of course, the most confused one was Gastly. How did this conversation suddenly turn to involve me? Chapter 28, The Autumn Outing, Part 3. Lavaridge Town. Not far from the restaurant stood a rather remote, somewhat dilapidated battle arena. As Flannery gazed at the old arena, her eyes reflected a bit of nostalgia. She had many fond memories here. However, she quickly put aside her sentimentality, her enthusiasm surging as she returned to being the girl burning with passion. Others might not have noticed this shift, but Johan certainly did. Come to think of it, whether in the original story or in what he knew of Flannery, apart from mentioning her grandfather, she rarely, if ever, spoke about her parents. "Mr. Johan, I won't hold back," Flannery declared, full of energy. On the sidelines, Steven and Roxanne exchanged concerned looks over Flannery's situation. For a trainer like Flannery, who let emotions rule over reason, it seemed like she was about to face her worst possible opponent, someone like Johan, a Pokémon psychologist. If Flannery had chosen to use her strongest Pokémon, perhaps she could rely on sheer strength to win. But... Caca, heat caca. Floating before Johan, Gastly let out a burp and turned to him with a questioning look. "Can't I just take her out right away?" "You can try," Johan replied, his eye twitching slightly before he added, "but be ready to face a former Elite Four member afterward." Caca. Gastly, degree. At that moment, Flannery threw out a Pokeball, and in a flash of red light, a Pokémon appeared on the field. It resembled a black dog, with prominent bone-like structures on its back, head, and ankles, giving the once cute creature a more menacing look. Its belly and muzzle were orange, and a short, stubby tail extended behind it. It was a dark and fire-type Pokémon Houndour. Seeing this Pokémon, both Steven and Roxanne were a bit surprised. They had expected Flannery to send out her Numel, a recently captured Pokémon as well. However, Numel, a fire and ground type, would have been at a disadvantage against Gastly, but Houndour, with its dark and fire attributes, now that was a clear advantage. After all, Gastly, being both ghost and poison type, was weak to dark type moves, Houndour's specialty. Moreover, if Flannery's Houndour had the early bird ability, it would give her an even greater edge. With such a lineup, there might actually be a chance for her to win. After all, Mr. Johan wasn't a professional trainer, and he likely didn't have much battle experience. If he only had theoretical knowledge. Flannery grinned excitedly. Being emotional didn't necessarily mean being foolish. Steven took a deep breath and called out, "Let the battle begin." Flannery dramatically pointed her arm, directing her Houndour. "Houndour, bite!" ARF. Houndour barked fiercely, its forelegs moving swiftly as dark, sinister energy began to swirl around its still developing fangs. At the same time, in Johan's vision, Houndour's stats appeared before him. Houndour. Type, Dark, Fire. Ability, Flash Fire. Moves, Leer, Ember, Howl, Smog, Roar, Bite, Fire Spin, Fire Fang. Mood, Excited, Worried, I have a bad feeling about this. Condition, Excellent, Well-trained, in peak condition. Friendship, 5, has some goodwill toward humans because of Flannery. Gastly, use Scary Face, Johan calmly instructed, his voice even. Though Gastly had been lazily floating around just moments ago, the Pokémon instantly snapped into focus, as if the previous lethargy had been a ruse. As a Gas-type Pokémon, Gastly was incredibly fast. In the blink of an eye, its body swelled like a balloon, transforming into a giant, grotesque face. Caca. The eerie laugh echoed as dark mist twisted and shifted, unsettling the young Houndour. Johan sighed internally. Why did trainers of dark-type Pokémon always insist on opening with Bite? Did they really believe type advantage determined everything? This wasn't a game, and move accuracy wasn't just based on hit rates or evasion stats. Did they think the opponent wouldn't exploit their weaknesses? Though flustered, Houndour still managed to snap its jaws shut. Bang! Teeth clashed with teeth, and black mist seeped through the gaps. All it had bitten was a small wisp of the gaseous body Gastly had inflated into a giant face. On the sidelines, Stephen and Roxanne exchanged a glance. Earlier, when Flannery had made the first move, Johan had responded almost simultaneously with his command. This allowed Gastly, with its eerie scary face move, to capitalize on the timing and shake Houndour's confidence. Simultaneous commands. Could it be that Johan had predicted Flannery's strategy from the start? Was he reading her moves ahead of time? Could this really be the teacher with little battle experience? Or was this the tactical prowess of a Pokémon psychologist? They had expected Johan to rely on Gastly's tricky, and frankly, annoying, moves to gain the upper hand. But to think it would play out like this. Use curse. Pokémon battles weren't turn-based, so with Houndour having missed its attack, Johan wouldn't let this opening slip by. Caw. Gastly let out a sinister laugh as an invisible, eerie energy seemed to sink into Houndour's body, planting a seed of dread that quickly began to grow. Houndour, we need to finish this fast. Flannery ordered, her expression turning serious. She was clearly aware of Curse's effects. She waved her arm again. Use Leer. Then charge in. Gastly, hypnosis. Once again, their voices rang out nearly simultaneously. Houndour widened its eyes menacingly, trying to intimidate its opponent. However, what happens when you open your eyes wide in front of hypnosis? Houndour's body trembled, and after taking a few shaky steps forward, it collapsed onto the ground, fast asleep. Get up! Houndour! Flannery's face flushed red as she shouted. Johan stared at the fallen Houndour for a few moments. When the energy of the curse began to sap away some of Houndour's strength, with no sign of it waking up, Johan finally relaxed a little. Thank goodness! Clearly, the bond between Flannery and her Houndour wasn't strong enough to break hypnosis with just a command. To be honest, Johan hadn't realized until this battle just how much he feared trainers like Flannery, the kind that didn't play by the rules, yet somehow managed to break the norm. The only way to handle such trainers was with someone even more unpredictable. Like a water-absorbing Charizard. It's over, Johan declared, calling an end to the battle. We haven't even. Flannery tried to protest. Gastly. Caw. In response, Gastly unleashed a rapid series of moves: Confuse Ray, Lick, Scary Face, Will-O-Wisp, Smog. Flannery's words died in her throat. A bead of sweat rolled down her forehead. You should call Houndour back before Curse affects it anymore. Otherwise, you'll be heading straight to the Pokémon Center, Johan advised calmly, as Gastly floated lazily back to his side. Meeting Johan's gaze, Gastly blinked and whispered in a low voice. Caw. Don't worry, I used the regular hypnosis. Gastly, I'm not that dumb. You said her grandpa is a former Elite Four member. Johan nodded in relief. He didn't want Houndour to develop any psychological issues. Otherwise, he'd have to be the one to treat it. We lost. Flannery reluctantly accepted the outcome. But Johan's interest had been piqued not so much in Flannery herself, but in trainers like her, the ones who were more emotional than logical. It was clear that Flannery and Houndour still had a ways to go in terms of teamwork. There was a noticeable gap between her commands and her Pokémon's actions. Johan was curious to see if, after more bonding, they might break through some of the usual limits. After all, that was a key area of research for his predecessor. As the battle ended, Stephen and Roxanne walked over. Roxanne tried to console Flannery, but to her surprise, Flannery wasn't nearly as devastated as expected. She quickly regained her enthusiasm. Looking at Johan, she beamed, Mr. Johan, I'll challenge you again next time. Johan. Great, the intelligence level is still going up. Chapter 29, The Autumn Outing, Part 4. Lavaridge Town. As the night deepened, a thin mist meandered through the starry sky, sometimes stretching across the distant vale, at other times forming elusive illusions, like the ever-changing Pokémon. The courtyard, with its winding paths, isolated the noise of the outside world, creating a serene atmosphere. In the backyard, an open-air hot spring, accompanied by the gentle sound of flowing water, stirred a ripple of tranquility in one's heart. Johan, wrapped in a white bath towel around his waist, slowly stepped into the warm waters. Stephen was already lazily lounging in the hot spring, his arms stretched out as he leaned against the stone edge of the pool. A neatly folded towel rested atop his head. In the end, Stephen, Roxanne, and Flannery's plan to sneak into the mountains was thwarted by Johan's victory over Flannery, putting an end to their escape attempt. As for soaking in the hot springs, that had always been part of the planned itinerary. However, it wasn't quite the mixed-gender bath Johan had imagined. On one side of the pool where Johan and Steven soaked stood a wooden partition. On the other side, Roxanne and Flannery were enjoying the hot spring. Splash! Splash! As the hot water reached his abdomen, Johan felt the magic of the hot spring as all his fatigue seemed to melt away. The rising steam, mingling with the mist, outlined the vague, dreamlike image of a handsome youth bathing. Mr. Johan. Hearing the movement, Steven opened his eyes slowly, briefly dazed before quickly regaining his focus. Johan leaned his head back against the smooth stones at the pool's edge, allowing his body to become buoyant in the water, feeling light and somewhat dizzy, as if floating on air. He waved his hand dismissively, cutting off Steven's words. Steven, we're not that far apart in age, right? Hearing this, Steven paused, then nodded. If I'm not mistaken, you're only 2 years older than me. You completed a 4-year university program in just 3 years, finished the 6-year advanced academy in 5 years, and as for the primary academy. Are you checking my background? You know so much. So, when it's just us, there's no need to be so formal. Just call me by my name, Johan interrupted him again. Johan. Steven hesitated briefly before trying out the name. Johan lazily hummed in response, eyes half closed. A teacher must learn to connect with students, to bridge gaps between them. This was especially true for a psychologist and their patients. Of course, this wasn't influenced by Steven's status or the fact that he probably didn't even realize just how wealthy his family was. At least, that wasn't the main reason. By the way, Johan continued, Lavaridge town's hot springs are quite famous, aren't they? Why is it that this place, which seems pretty decent, is so empty with only us here? Don't tell me you bought the place. Hearing this, Steven chuckled and shook his head. Not exactly. But before Johan could speak again, Steven added, the nearby properties are already owned by my family. Johan. He raised his hand and gave a thumbs up. Well, that made things easier. Gastly, Johan called out. Splash. Suddenly, the once calm surface of the water erupted as Gastly shot up from the hot spring. With a mischievous grin plastered on its face, Gastly declared, Caw-caw. Gastly evolves into Ghost Damp? Johan and Steven. But Johan quickly sat upright in alarm. Wait, aren't you soaking in water? You're made of poisonous gas. Caw-caw. Gastly, Sigma, degree. After a brief episode of chaos, Steven and Johan now sat on the edge of the pool, with Gastly sheepishly floating nearby. Fortunately, since Gastly could control its poison, no harm was done despite being submerged in the water. Since we're at it, let's bring everyone out, Steven said, tossing a few pokeballs into the air. In an instant, his shiny Metagross, Laren, Skarmory and Claydol materialized. However, Laren and Claydol, being rock and ground-type Pokémon, instinctively recoiled from the water, and as a bird Pokémon, Skarmory didn't seem too fond of soaking in a hot spring either. In the end, only Metagross and Gastly joined them in the water. But both Johan and Steven were slightly on edge, repeatedly warning their Pokémon. Control the poison, or the electromagnetic field. Finally, the hot spring grew calm once more. Grutus, Metagross grumbled, apparently feeling little from the experience. Caw-caw. What? Look at this. Gastly dove back into the water, blowing bubbles with a gurgle. Metagross glanced over at the Pokémon on the sidelines Laren and Skarmory. Anyone wanna play with it? Laren and Skarmory simultaneously turned to Claydol. Claydol. Seeing the Pokémon having a lively chat, Johan took the opportunity to relax. He leaned against the edge of the pool and pulled out his phone. Soon enough, he noticed a message from his client, Evie Eats Cabbage. Evie Eats Cabbage, alright, I've made the Pokeblocks. Phoebus really likes them, and its condition seems to have improved a bit, though it's still shy around other Pokémon. Evie Eats Cabbage, this may sound a bit forward, but could you help with some psychological therapy? Psychological therapy? If it were something like Mewtwo's case, it wouldn't be impossible, but for Phoebus? Was he supposed to have Phoebus type? Even video chats might not work, he'd probably need to use hypnosis to conduct any psychological intervention. Grain in the field, apologies, I have other work commitments, so. A face-to-face meeting? That's a bit risky. Who knew what kind of person was really behind the cute username? For all he knew, it could be some creepy guy. As someone who remembered their past life, Johan was very cautious about such things. Since EV Eats Cabbage was offline, Johan's message didn't get an immediate response. However, besides that, he received a message from another user. Number Wizard, Pokeballs are a form of restraint on Pokémon, preventing them from achieving their full existence and happiness. I believe that Pokémon and humans should live separately, Pokémon in their own world, and humans behind the walls of their steel cities. For some reason, seeing this message gave Johan a strange sense of déjà vu. But then his thoughts returned to the question at hand. Were captured Pokémon truly unhappy? Johan glanced at the hot spring. Floating on the surface, basking in the mist, was Gastly, who had fashioned a wooden tray to hold a bottle of Moo Moo milk. Several straws connected from the bottle directly to Gastly's mouth. Was Gastly unhappy? Nearby, Steven, wrapped in a towel, was scrubbing Laren's back. Sparkling white suds covered his face as both he and Laren wore matching smiles. Metagross and Skarmory were waiting their turn. Were they unhappy? Not really. Granted, there were indeed unhappy Pokémon in this world, but they were the exception rather than the rule. This is classic idealism, where someone's personal experience is projected onto everyone else, and they believe they need to build a utopia for all. Johan didn't reject this person's ideas outright, though. Their intentions were good, they wanted to protect Pokémon. It was just that their experiences had skewed their perspective. Stubbornness. Johan sighed. A preconceived notion like this was the hardest to change. Even if he presented the real truth, if it didn't match what this person wanted, they would simply reject it. So, the best approach in such cases was not to directly oppose them. If you did, they wouldn't listen to a word you said. Instead, you had to see things from their point of view, stand where they stood, and earn their trust. Only then could you present them with the true reality and perhaps help them see their ideal world more clearly. After thinking it over for a while, Johan finally responded. Grain in the field, if you come across Pokémon that are being mistreated, please do your best to save them. To those Pokémon, you might be the only light in their dark world, their hero. After sending the message, Johan set his phone aside and sighed once more. Caca. Noticing Johan's shift in mood, Gastly floated over, spitting out the straw it had been sipping from. What's wrong? Johan shook his head. It was hard to imagine what someone must have gone through to develop such extreme ideas. His thoughts grew heavier. Caca. The mist around Gastly shifted, transforming into a pair of clamshells, followed by sharp spikes extending out. Gastly Cloyster mode. Pfft. Seeing Gastly perfectly imitate Cloyster, Johan couldn't help but burst out laughing. Ca ca ca. Gastly joined in, laughing alongside him. Though its laugh was a bit creepy. Steven, drawn by the sound of their laughter, couldn't help but remark, Johan, you and Gastly have such a great bond. Boom. Suddenly, a loud explosion echoed, accompanied by the startled screams of Roxanne and Flannery. Chapter 30, The Change at Mt. Chimney. The dense velvet sky obscured the moon, and the lingering mist carried an unsettling chill, as if some unseen dark presence lurked in the shadows, watching. In contrast, the explosive roar that followed was like a harbinger of light, tearing through the dark curtain with a deafening crack. It rumbled on, echoing like the earth itself was splitting open. Hearing the sound, both Johan and Steven's expressions changed, and Gastly along with Metagross immediately moved to their sides, ready to protect them. The next second. Crash! A massive boulder came crashing down, shattering the wooden partition that separated the two hot springs. The two springs were now connected. What happened? Steven quickly asked. There's Roxanne started, but her face, already flushed from soaking in the hot water, now turned an even deeper shade of red, much like a ripe apple. Her cheeks were burning, her usual twin tails had come undone, and her damp hair now draped over her shoulders. Fortunately, all four of them, Roxanne, Flannery, Johan, and Steven, were wrapped in towels. Steven, too, seemed taken aback, but quickly realized the situation and displayed a hint of embarrassment. A rock. A huge rock just fell down from the mountain. Flannery exclaimed, far less self-conscious than the others, and immediately filled in the missing details. In fact, given her similar build to Johan and Steven, well, let's just say, ahem. The mountain? Johan, the only one who remained somewhat calm, furrowed his brow and looked up at the mountain. Since Lavaridge town's hot springs rely on the heat from Mt. Chimney, many of the townsends and hot springs are located near the mountain. Johan and Stephen's side of the springs was relatively safe, but Roxanne and Flannery's side was almost directly adjacent to the rocky slopes of Mt. Chimney. Because of the distance and the jagged terrain, it was hard to determine what had happened up on the mountain. However, the dark night made one thing visible: a faint glow of fire could be seen rising from the upper reaches of the mountain. The flickering flames looked like a sword piercing the night sky, growing larger and brighter as if threatening to tear a hole through the darkness. Could it be that the volcano has opened up, and lava is starting to seep out? Johan muttered to himself. Upon hearing this, the expressions of the other three drastically changed. Flannery, who had already changed into her clothes, stared intently at the firelight in the night sky, her face set with determination. It was clear that she had every intention of heading up the mountain. If Mt. Chimney had indeed developed a fissure that allowed lava to escape, the position of the firelight suggested that Lavaridge town could be in imminent danger. Lavaridge town was Flannery's home. There was no way she could sit back and do nothing. It wasn't just her. Stephen and Roxanne, though less visibly shaken, shared the same concern. Noticing the determination in their faces, Johan sighed inwardly. He understood that at this point, simply acting as their teacher wasn't enough to quell the sense of duty and justice burning within them. Though the firelight wasn't overly intense yet, and the dark red hue of Mt. Chimney's surface often concealed such dangers, the fact that a boulder had fallen alerted them to the problem. The fire was growing, albeit slowly, indicating that if lava was leaking, now was the best time to intervene before things got worse. There wasn't much time to deliberate, but Johan had already made his decision. Roxanne, Flannery, I want you two to notify the Lavaridge gym, the local police, and the other teachers at the Pokémon Center. Stephen and I will go take a look. If anyone had to go investigate, it was only right that as the teacher, Johan should take the lead. Stephen, being the strongest among them, was also a necessary part of the team. Additionally, his Metagross, Skarmory, and Claydol would be essential in case things got out of hand, providing them a way to escape if necessary. Mr. Johan, Roxanne started to protest but was quickly silenced by Johan's firm, unyielding gaze. I understand, she finally said, lowering her head and taking a deep breath, realizing the gravity of the situation. Flannery, however, wasn't as easy to convince. No. I have to go. She demanded, and before Johan could even respond, she added, I know the area best. I know a shortcut that'll get us there quickly. Time was of the essence. Johan could see the determination in Flannery's eyes and, after a moment, replied in a serious tone, all right. You lead the way, but if anything happens, you have to follow my commands. Deal. Caca. Gastly brought Johan his clothes. Mt. Chimney. Jagged rocks and steep cliffs surrounded them as three figures quickly made their way through the rugged terrain. This is the shortcut you were talking about. Johan leaped over uneven rocks, keeping pace with Flannery. I used to take this path all the time. It might look dangerous, but as long as you don't misstep, it's perfectly safe, Flannery called back from the front. As long as we don't misstep. Both Stephen and Johan glanced down at their feet. Silence. Johan felt a bit of regret. If it had just been him and Stephen, they could have used Skarmory, Metagross, and Claydol to fly straight up to their destination. While relying on psychic-type abilities to fly that high would have drained a lot of energy from their Pokémon, this route did conserve their strength in case of emergencies, and it wasn't much slower. Still, it was a bit of a strain on those who weren't built like super rookies. Fortunately, despite Flannery's impulsive nature, her shortcut did seem to be leading them directly to their destination. Soon enough, they reached a small plateau. Hicka, hicka. Scattered across the plateau were several Geodude and even some Graveler, all huddled in the corners, trembling in fear. As Johan, Stephen, and Flannery approached, the Pokémon retreated even further, causing small rocks to tumble down the mountainside. However, the trio's attention was immediately drawn to the sight before them, a glowing red crack in the rocky wall of the mountain. The fissure wasn't large, barely wide enough for a person to pass through, but the firelight they had seen from below was emanating from within it. What is this? The trio moved closer, feeling the intense heat radiating from the crack. It was far hotter than the warmth they had felt back in Lavaridge town. Flap, flap. Suddenly, a Zubat darted out of the crack, flying frantically away from the mountain. Johan, Stephen, and Flannery quickly stepped aside to avoid any collision. Moments later, a swarm of Zubat, along with a few Golbat, poured out of the fissure, hastily fleeing from Mt. Chimney. Seeing this, the three trainers' expressions grew more solemn. Wild Pokémon are always the first to sense changes in their environment. Both the Geodude and the fleeing Zubat indicated that something inside the mountain was terrifying them, or perhaps it was something even more dangerous. Gastly, Johan called quietly. Given the circumstances, rushing in blindly was not an option. Johan held Flannery back, preventing her from charging in recklessly. Caw. Gastly floated out from Johan's jacket, peering into the dark fissure, clearly unafraid. If anything, it seemed slightly excited. Be careful. Johan couldn't help but give a stern warning. Caw. Gastly blinked at Johan and let out a mischievous laugh before transforming into a dark cloud of mist, disappearing into the fissure. Time seemed to stretch on, each second ticking by slowly. Although Johan usually maintained his composure, he couldn't help but feel a little anxious this time, not for himself, but for Gastly. After all, the situation inside the mountain was unknown, and Gastly's strength wasn't exactly top tier. Moreover, this was Mt. Chimney. Caw. Thankfully, Gastly soon emerged from the fissure. It was panting heavily, tongue hanging out, clearly displeased with the intense heat inside the mountain. But seeing Gastly return brought a wave of relief to Johan. How is it, Gastly? Caw. Gastly inhaled deeply, causing its body to puff up. Inside, there's something big. Chapter 31, Warning. Warning. A big one? Johan's face tightened. That phrase could mean many things. Especially inside Mt. Chimney, Johan instinctively thought of Groudon, the terrifying entity said to be slumbering deep within the volcano. But on second thought, it didn't seem likely. If it really were Groudon, with the power it holds, Mt. Chimney would have already erupted by now. There would be far more destruction than just this small fissure. Is there no more information to go on? Johan glanced again at Gastly. After today, he decided that as soon as they got back, he would begin teaching Gastly how to recognize other Pokémon. At the very least, it needed to be able to identify different Pokémon. Otherwise, such vague reports could continue to be a problem in the future. Caw. Gastly seemed to realize that its description wasn't clear enough. It narrowed its eyes and thought, its dark mist swirling around it. Suddenly, Gastly seemed to have a breakthrough. The black mist shifted and stretched, slowly forming limbs as it dropped to the ground. Then it opened its mouth wide, exhaling a puff of dark smoke. Limbs? A Camerupt. Stephen guessed. But Camerupt, though large, wouldn't exactly qualify as a big one, would it? Johan considered another possibility. Could it be the legendary Pokémon, Heatran? Although Mt. Coronet in Sinnoh was typically where he would expect to find a Heatran, theoretically, Mt. Chimney belonged to Groudon's domain, and a Heatran wouldn't dare claim it as a habitat. But it wasn't entirely out of the question. After all, Groudon was dormant, and Mt. Chimney's high-temperature environment would certainly appeal to a Heatran. If it was Heatran, though, that would spell serious trouble. Boom! Before Johan could ponder further, the sound of rocks shattering echoed from the fissure. Immediately after, the narrow crack, already radiating scorching heat, belched forth another wave of intense warmth. A bright, glowing stream of molten lava started to trickle from the corner of the fissure. Lava! Geodude! Seeing the lava, the Geodude and Graveler already huddled in the corner became even more frantic. At the same time, the lava began to slowly snake its way down the mountainside. Flannery! Johan called out sharply. On it! Flannery quickly took out 2 Pokeballs. In a flash of red light, she summoned a Numel and a Slugma. Slugma, a lava Pokémon, had a body resembling molten magma. It thrived in volcanic environments and felt right at home in such high temperatures. While the lava would be deadly to most Pokémon, to Slugma, it was like a comfortable bed. The Slugma slithered forward, intercepting the thin flow of lava, blocking its path down the mountain. Numel joined Slugma in trying to control the flow. Johan, Slugma can't hold this back for long. Flannery called out urgently. Let's move. Johan ordered. Despite his growing concern, Johan knew they had no choice. The lava had already started to flow. If they didn't act quickly, the lava could spill further, leading to a massive eruption of molten rock from the heart of Mt. Chimney. And if it really turned out to be Heatran? Well, they'd have to do their best to either calm it down or buy enough time. Roxanne had already gone to alert the authorities in Lavaridge town, including Flannery's grandfather, the retired former Elite Four member. He should be able to handle Heatran. As long as they could get there in time. There was another reason why Johan decided to proceed. That reason was Gastly. Despite the urgency of the situation, Gastly's report, although unclear, suggested that if the danger were too great, it would have warned them to stay back. Johan trusted Gastly completely. "I'll go first," Stephen declared, summoning Claydol to his side as he entered the fissure before anyone else. The narrow crack made it difficult for Metagross or Skarmory to move, so the smaller, more maneuverable Claydol was the perfect choice. Johan, with Gastly by his side, quickly followed behind. If the heat from outside had been uncomfortable, it was nothing compared to the suffocating warmth inside the fissure. The air was so thick with heat that both Johan and Stephen were drenched in sweat almost immediately. Surprisingly, the temperature wasn't as unbearable as they had expected. After all, Zubat and Golbat had been living inside, so the internal climate wasn't completely inhospitable. Guided by Gastly, they ventured deeper into the tunnel, the heat intensifying with every step, drenching their clothes and painting their faces with a fiery red glow. Boom! Boom! As they moved further inside, a series of deep, rumbling sounds began to echo through the tunnel. Finally, they emerged into a larger, open space within the volcano. Scanning their surroundings, they quickly spotted several Numel huddled together in one corner. Known for their docile demeanor, even the Numel looked terrified, eyes wide with fear and uncertainty. What were they so afraid of? Following their gaze, Johan and Stephen finally saw the source of the disturbance. A Camerupt. The massive Pokémon stood before them, covered in bright orange fur, with two large rocky humps on its back. From those humps spewed molten lava, like a miniature volcano erupting on its own. It was clearly agitated. Its body was trembling, and it stomped its feet violently, causing the ground around it to crack and crumble. Behind it, a wall of the cavern had been scorched black, with fresh, molten lava slowly leaking from a jagged crack. It was obvious now the small stream of lava they had seen earlier had originated from this Camerupt. However, both Johan and Stephen were taken aback by one detail. Typically, a Camerupt stood around 1.8 to 2 meters tall. But the one standing before them now was at least 3 meters tall. This was a giant Camerupt. The big one that Gastly had mentioned. Boom! Boom! Two more spurts of molten lava erupted from the volcano-like humps on Camerupt's back. As Johan and Stephen locked eyes with it, its bloodshot eyes glared back at them. Ruar! The Camerupt let out a furious roar, its open mouth glowing with intense heat. Johan and Stephen's expressions shifted. Stephen quickly reached for more Pokeballs, summoning Metagross, Skarmory, and Laren to the field. But all three of his Pokémon were steel types, which were naturally at a disadvantage against Camerupt's fire and ground-type moves. Moreover, this was Camerupt's home turf. At the same time, Johan's vision filled with Camerupt's Pokédex information. Camerupt. Type: Fire/Ground. Ability: Magma Armor. Moves: Rock Slide, Fissure, Flamethrower, Growl, Tackle, Ember, Focus Energy, Stomp, Lava Plume, Amnesia, Smokescreen, Earth Power, Takedown. Emotion: Furious, it may have consumed something it shouldn't have. Status: Unstable, this isn't a normal state for a Pokémon. Warning! Warning! Friendship, -50, Danger. You stepped forward with your left foot first. This Camerupt was no joke. Even if it weren't in this frenzied state, it would still be leagues stronger than Gastly. The frenzy had increased its strength, but it also made its already low intelligence even worse. Johan exchanged a glance with Stephen. Boom! A surge of fire exploded toward them. Metagross, Claydol, use Psychic. Gastly, use Curse. Their commands came almost simultaneously. Bzzz. A transparent, light blue psychic barrier formed instantly, blocking the raging flames just 3 meters away from Stephen and Johan. Caw. Gastly's body swelled momentarily as an eerie force invisibly burrowed into Camerupt's body, planting the seeds of a curse that would soon take root. Skarmory, use Sand Attack. Laren, use Mud Slap. The situation with Camerupt, their Pokémon types, and the sheer weight of their collective experience led both trainers to adopt the same strategy: they would play it safe and wear Camerupt down. Dust and mud flew, obscuring Camerupt's vision as it unleashed another torrent of fire, scorching the cavern. Rocks began to fall, and though the fire started to die down, Camerupt's rage only seemed to grow. It took a deep breath, and a white energy field surrounded its body. Focus energy. Then, it reared up on its hind legs, gathering earth-toned energy between its front hooves. This is bad. It's preparing to use Fissure. Fissure is a ground-type move that, under normal circumstances, guarantees a knockout if it hits. While most of the Pokémon present, including Gastly, wouldn't be too affected by it, Johan feared what the aftermath of this move could bring. One wrong step and this entire cavern might collapse. Chapter 32, Heatran. Boom. The ground split open with a deafening crack, sending rocks flying in all directions. A massive chasm appeared, as if the earth itself had opened its mouth, threatening to swallow everything. Camerupt's Fissure had landed. In a situation like this, where there wasn't an overwhelming difference in strength, no one would let their Pokémon stand still and get hit by such a devastating move. The sheer force of the attack made Johan feel as if the entire mountain was shaking violently. The only silver lining was that despite the power of the Fissure, Johan's and Steven's Pokémon were unharmed. Johan and Steven released their grip on Metagross, landing back on solid ground. The fact was, the enraged Camerupt, with its vision obscured, couldn't properly target Gastly and the others. But things couldn't continue like this. Who knew if Camerupt's next Fissure wouldn't cause a further collapse, worsening the lava flow from Mt Chimney? The problem was that even though both Johan and Steven wanted to speed things up and subdue Camerupt, it wasn't that simple. With Camerupt in its current state, combined with the power gap between it and Gastly, Johan knew that status-altering moves likely wouldn't have much effect. Still, he had to try. Gastly, use Haze. If they were lucky and could poison Camerupt, combined with the curse already in place and Steven's Pokémon, the tide of the battle could shift. Caca. Gastly sighed inwardly. This was tough. This Camerupt was clearly way out of Gastly's league. Relying on it to wear down Camerupt was a long shot. But Gastly wasn't one to back down from a challenge. Why not try? There doesn't seem to be a better plan. Johan, try this. Steven tossed something toward Johan, a dark, purplish-black sphere, encased in a thin layer of transparent material. Hey? Johan caught it and glanced down. A toxic orb. A steel-type specialist carrying around a toxic orb? This thing wasn't cheap, either. Toxic orb, a ball filled with potent poison gas. Holding it puts the user in a badly poisoned state. Warning, do not consume. But now wasn't the time to dwell on such details. Clutching the toxic orb tightly, Johan formed a bold idea in his mind. Caca. Gastly, also noticing the toxic orb, had its eyes light up, clearly intrigued. Caca. Johan threw the orb toward Gastly, but before Gastly could celebrate, Johan said, hold on to it for now. Our goal is to get it to Camerupt. Caca. Gastly's voice rose in surprise. Don't worry, we'll take it back after Camerupt goes down, Johan reassured. Steven, overhearing, seemed to realize Johan's plan. Of course. He muttered under his breath. Steven, keep it distracted. Gastly and I will make our move, Johan ordered. Got it. Meanwhile, Camerupt showed no signs of calming down. Its back-mounted volcano continued to erupt with lava, and flames began to build in its mouth. It was readying another attack. Johan and Steven both thought the same thing. Camerupt suddenly lifted its head and launched a fiery blast upward. The flames formed a glowing fireball in the air before exploding, sending smaller bursts of flame flying in every direction. Lava plume. Now's our chance. Metagross and Claydol quickly activated their psychic barriers, doing their best to block the incoming fire. Meanwhile, Skarmory flapped its wings in midair, causing a sharp, ear-piercing screech with its metal sound, drawing Camerupt's attention. Laren, having been resummoned, stomped the ground, sending two rocky chains shooting up, wrapping around Camerupt and temporarily restraining its movement. Gastly! Johan shouted. Caca! Suddenly, from below the ground, Gastly emerged right in front of Camerupt's face, hurling the toxic orb straight into Camerupt's mouth. Gulp! Camerupt swallowed it with a loud gulp. Before it could even register what had happened, a purple glow began to spread across its body. Camerupt is now badly poisoned. Its body wobbled, its vision becoming blurry, and its limbs felt weak. The frenzied state that had been pushing its body to the limit caused the poison to spread even faster. On top of that, Camerupt had already been fighting for some time, its body nearing exhaustion. The poison was only accelerating that process. Camerupt shook its head in an attempt to clear its vision, but the purple hue only deepened, and it began to stagger. It tried to mount one final attack. But its efforts were in vain. At last, in front of Johan and Steven, Camerupt collapsed heavily onto the ground. Johan and Steven exchanged glances, both letting out a sigh of relief. Now they could focus on finding a way to seal the lava fissure. Under Johan's direction, Gastly began scouting the rock layers, searching for the optimal spot to reinforce and block the lava flow. But just when they thought the situation was under control, an unexpected development occurred. Boom, boom, boom. Heavy footsteps echoed from a different tunnel, followed by an intense wave of heat, as if a surge of molten lava was rushing toward them. Johan and Steven's faces both darkened as they turned toward the tunnel, which was now glowing with an ominous red light. When Johan's eyes adjusted, his pupils constricted. Emerging from the shadows was a hulking figure, its reddish-brown body appearing as though it was forged from molten lava and steel. Its powerful limbs, glinting with a metallic sheen, allowed it to cling to the cave walls almost as if it were walking upside down. Its fiery, molten eyes locked onto Johan and Steven. An even bigger threat? Sensing the danger, Steven's Pokémon immediately gathered to defend him. Wait! Johan quickly stopped Steven, his voice low. Don't move. Steven understood the gravity of the situation, calming his Pokémon as he quietly asked, "Is that?" The pressure emanating from the creature was overwhelming, like a tidal wave of molten rock bearing down on them. Steven knew immediately that this was no ordinary opponent. This wasn't just a matter of a difference in strength. Johan's voice dropped to almost a whisper as he replied, "The legendary beast born from magma. Heatran, the guardian of volcanoes." Heatran, the legendary beast. Steven was taken aback, his eyes glimmering with awe. As a fan of Steel-type Pokémon, Steven knew all too well what it meant to face a Fire/Steel Pokémon like Heatran. With 5 4x resistances and 4 2x resistances, Heatran was a fortress of defense. Johan, for his part, was quite familiar with Heatran as well. Before Pokémon Sword and Shield was released, Heatran had been a staple in competitive battling. Its Fire/Steel typing gave it incredible resistances, and while it had a glaring 4x weakness to ground, items like Air Balloon could help mitigate that issue. And both of Heatran's abilities Flash Fire and Flame Body were top-notch. But as more powerful Fire-type Pokémon were introduced, Heatran gradually faded from prominence, especially with the advent of moves like Scorching Sands, which pushed it out of the top tier. Still, that was the Heatran from Johan's previous life in the games. What stood before them now was the very real and very imposing Heatran, a mythical creature with immense power. However, after staring them down for a while, Heatran made no move to attack. In fact, Heatran waved a claw at them. "Is it telling us to leave?" Steven looked at Johan, unsure. "Is Heatran protecting Mt Chimney?" Johan wondered. Because after Heatran's appearance, the lava flow seemed to be stabilizing. "Gastly," Johan called out, "let's go." "Caw-caw." Gastly's voice echoed from the lava fissure. "There's a weird red stone here." Peering through the crack, Johan could just make out Gastly flying in circles above the lava, as if it had discovered something. Steven's eyes lit up. "A stone?" But both Johan and Heatran's eyes widened in alarm. "Get away from that stone, now!" Caw-caw. Chapter 33, Former Elite Four member. Caw-caw. Though confused, Gastly, sensing the tone in Johan's voice, obediently returned to his side. Seeing this, Heatran also relaxed slightly. "From now on, stay away from rocks and lava, especially the red ones," Johan instructed. "And if they have stripes on them, don't even think about flying near them." After thinking for a moment, he added, "But if you accidentally do get close, stop floating around like that." Caw-caw. Gastly blinked a couple of times. Striped red stones? What could be so special about them? In reality, that stone wasn't all that unique, but if one looked closely, they'd notice that a significant amount of the lava was seeping through the cracks around it. Obviously, the stone was helping to block the lava flow. If Gastly had accidentally loosened it, the outcome could have been disastrous. From the way Heatran had reacted, it was likely that it had placed the stone there itself, though for what exact reason was unknown. Perhaps it was to protect the Pokémon living in the mountain and below? Or maybe there was something within the lava that needed to be kept in check. Roar! Heatran crawled out of the tunnel, hanging upside down from the cave ceiling. It waved its claw at Johan and Steven again, signaling for them to leave and not cause any more trouble. Johan, for his part, was more than ready to leave. While Heatran hadn't been hostile, who could say how long its goodwill would last? Johan retrieved the unconscious Camerupt into a Pokeball. Taming this Camerupt would be no easy task. Just healing it would likely take a long time and be quite expensive. For now, it was more practical to store it in a Pokeball. With Heatran watching them closely, Johan and Steven slowly retreated, taking their Pokémon along. However, just before leaving the cave, Johan hesitated briefly before taking out 3 bottles of Moo milk and some energy cubes. Facing the somewhat surprised Heatran, Johan said, "Thanks." Roar! After the two left, Heatran slowly approached the items Johan had left behind, sniffing them cautiously. Its eyes lit up. It raised its head and glanced in the direction they had gone. These people aren't bad, Heatran thought. Picking up the goods, it returned deeper into the cave, giving the red-hot stone a gentle pat and letting out a sigh. That little one has sharp instincts. As Johan and Steven emerged from the crack in the mountain, both let out long sighs of relief. The hot, stifling air receded, and as the cooler outside breeze hit their sweat-soaked clothes, they felt a bit of a chill. Caw-caw, caw-caw. Gastly was also taking deep breaths, clearly relieved to be out of the suffocating heat of Mt. Chimney. Looks like the issue's been resolved. A calm voice came from nearby. Only then did Johan and Steven notice Flannery standing with an older man, his hair grey but his posture tall and imposing. He wore round-framed glasses and looked to be in excellent shape. Flannery caught their gaze and winked playfully. "Master Mura," Steven said, testingly, as if recognizing the old man. The old man nodded seriously. "I'm no longer part of the Elite Four. I'm now the gym leader of Lavaridge town." Johan and Steven exchanged a glance, neither betraying much emotion. "Gym leader Mura," they both greeted respectfully. Mura nodded, clearly satisfied, though a faint smile tugged at the corners of his mouth. "Grandpa, your smile is showing," Flannery interrupted, teasingly. "Didn't I tell you not to go running up Mt. Chimney whenever you feel like it?" Mura's voice suddenly rose, launching into a stern lecture. "It's dangerous, especially taking those treacherous paths." Mura's scolding seemed endless, but Flannery remained unfazed, standing beside him with a bored expression and even casually picking at her ear. "Caw-caw." Gastly floated near Johan's head. This guy was an Elite Four member? It doesn't seem like much. Johan shot Gastly a sidelong glance, then turned his attention back to Mura, who had stopped lecturing his granddaughter. His expression shifted when Flannery muttered, "Dad used to take me here all the time." Mura's face showed a complex range of emotions, but he quickly turned his attention to Johan. "You must be teacher Johan, correct? Thank you for taking care of Flannery." To Johan's surprise, the former Elite Four member and current gym leader bowed deeply, a full 90 degrees. Johan quickly stepped forward, helping Mura up. "You're too kind, gym leader Mura. I'm just doing what a teacher should do." Mura sighed. "You wouldn't understand. Flannery's been a handful since she was a child." Mura then began recounting Flannery's childhood stories with surprising enthusiasm. Like the time she accidentally got her hair singed by a slugma, or when she sat on the back of a torkoal and burned herself. "Grandpa." Embarrassed, Flannery's face turned beet red. She immediately dashed down the mountain, leaving the rest of them behind. "Flannery, get back here. Grandpa's not done talking." Mura shouted after her, clearly concerned, and hurried to chase her. "Caw-caw." Gastly floated near Johan. "They're kind of alike, hey?" "Kind of? They're exactly the same," Johan thought with a wry smile. In Lavaridge Gym, Mura, Officer Jenny, Nurse Joy and Johan's group were gathered in the reception room. After listening to Johan and Steven's account of the events, Mura seemed a bit surprised but also as though he had expected it. "So you encountered Heatran?" Mura asked. "What's a Heatran?" Flannery interrupted. "Did you know about that Heatran, Gym leader Mura? Johan asked in return. He had suspected as much. Heatran's lack of hostility and even faint kindness toward them had suggested that it had prior interactions with someone from the town, likely Mura. What is a Heatran? Flannery asked again, louder this time. Let's just say we've crossed paths before. Heatran is the guardian of Mt Chimney, Mura explained, taking a deep breath before sipping his tea. He didn't seem eager to elaborate further. That explains it. Johan nodded, also sipping his tea. He had no interest in pressing the matter. But seriously, what's a Heatran? Flannery's frustration was growing as she pulled at her hair. Stephen chuckled softly and explained, it's a mythical Pokémon Heatran, the Lava Dome Pokémon. Flannery's eyes lit up at the mention of a mythical Pokémon. Meanwhile, Nurse Joy and Officer Jenny had completed their initial treatment and examination of the weakened Camerupt. Excuse me, but I'll need to take this one back to the Pokémon Center for further care, Nurse Joy said gently, her voice soft and soothing. The Chansey by her side nodded in agreement. We'll also investigate the cause of Camerupt's rampage, Officer Jenny added. Thank you for your assistance. A formal letter of thanks will be sent to your academy in a few days. Compared to Nurse Joy's warmth, Officer Jenny was much more serious. As the two prepared to leave, Johan hesitated briefly before speaking. Officer Jenny, I have a hunch perhaps this Camerupt might be linked to the giant graveler that was found outside Movali City. Oh. Officer Jenny looked intrigued. Do you have additional information, Teacher Johan? Johan shook his head. It's just a theory. I hope it doesn't interfere with your investigation. Officer Jenny gave him a deep look before nodding. We'll coordinate with the Movali City Police for a possible information exchange. That night, in a twin room on the third floor of the Lavaridge Town Pokémon Center. Here you go. Johan tossed a small, purple sphere to Gastly. It was the toxic orb. Caca. Gastly's eyes lit up, and it caught the orb in its mouth, eagerly licking the surface with its tongue. It could feel that this toxic orb would greatly enhance its poison-type abilities. However, after licking for a while, Gastly suddenly paused. Caca. Wait, how did they even get this back? Hearing Gastly's question, Johan nonchalantly replied, oh, Nurse Joy used a machine to retrieve it. Gastly stared at him, but couldn't find any sign of deceit in Johan's expression. Is that true? But then Gastly noticed Johan removing a pair of white gloves and tossing them into the trash. Gastly froze. A second later. Caca. I don't need this tongue anymore. Chapter 34, N. Unova region. The blackened night sky, cloaked in fog, carried an eerie chill, as though hiding some grand secret. When lightning suddenly flashed, it seemed more like a divine sword piercing through the darkness, bringing with it a holy mission and purpose. A brilliant white light flickered across the horizon, like a sharp blade descending from the heavens. At the end of the dazzling lightning strike, a faint figure appeared, as if it were dispelling all the surrounding darkness. Yet, as the lightning faded, the figure vanished into deeper shadows, replaced by the endless rain and howling wind. The cold wind and fine rain wove together with the oppressive night sky to form an impenetrable web. The castle's towering dome cast a shadow sharp as a blade, falling upon a young man. He sat slouched against the castle's railing, a green-haired figure in a white short-sleeved shirt, with a Rubik's Cube hanging at his waist. The cold wind howled around him, the fine rain tracing across his face. He adjusted his hat's brim, and his expressionless, calm eyes gazed out toward the distant horizon. Woo! Perhaps because of the cold or the rain, an Arcanine curled up beside him stood up and moved closer, offering him warmth. The young man's gaze gradually focused. Feeling the concern of his companion, he smiled gently, stroking Arcanine's fur. Woo! Arcanine's tail wagged, clearly happy with the young man's response. It nuzzled against his face, licking him, bringing out a warmer smile from him. Hugging Arcanine, the young man looked down at his phone nearby. Even if you hadn't asked, I would have done it. But... a hero, hey! A twinkle like a star in the night sky flickered in the boy's green eyes. At that moment, it's time for your etiquette lessons. A deep, commanding voice echoed from within the castle. Woo! Sensing N's reluctance, Arcanine whimpered softly. But N simply gave it a reassuring pat, signaling that he was fine. What N didn't realize was that the sparkle in his eyes had already dimmed again, becoming lifeless, like still water. I'm coming. Hone region, Lavaridge town. The events at Mt. Chimney from the previous night had been handled swiftly, so only a few people knew about them. While Roxanne had notified the other teachers accompanying the trip, only a select few, like Teacher Duff, were aware of what had happened. Thus, the autumn field trip continued as planned the following day. With so many students participating, each class was assigned to different areas of Mt. Chimney for wilderness exploration. As the strongest class, the first-year battle class was assigned to one of the more dangerous regions. Of course, dangerous was a relative term under the teacher's protection, there wasn't much real danger. The activity truly felt like a typical field trip. The Academy's primary goal was to help the students acclimate to outdoor environments. The real wilderness training would come during future excursions. On a ledge midway up Mt. Chimney, the first-year battle class was resting. Since there wasn't any pressure, the students relaxed in groups, chatting and laughing among themselves. Johan sat on a rock, watching Gastly with a helpless expression. I already told you, yes, Nurse Joy used a machine to remove the toxic orb. If it wasn't removed properly, it would have caused further harm to Camerupt. Johan emphasized the word yes. Caca. Gastly tilted its head, giving Johan a skeptical look. Then why did you throw away your gloves yesterday? Why wouldn't I throw out gloves that handled the toxic orb? Johan countered. Gastly seemed to hesitate. Caca. Really? Otherwise, how about you give it to me, and I'll return it to Stephen. Seeing Johan's outstretched hand, Gastly huffed indignantly. It doesn't matter how it came to me. I licked it, so now it's mine. Gastly puffed up, looking very resolute. Seeing this, Johan chuckled. All right then, next time I'll get you some black sludge. Let's have a battle, classmates. Suddenly, a boy with a slight air of arrogance stood up, clutching a pokeball, and loudly suggested a battle. To his surprise, a few classmates eagerly responded. Thus, an impromptu class battle began, with enthusiasm running high. Teacher Johan. To Johan's surprise, Flannery, normally so competitive, approached him instead of joining the battles. Looking up, he saw her looking slightly embarrassed. Finally, after a moment's hesitation, she quickly thrust a thin book into his hands and hurried away. This is from my grandpa. He said it's a thank you gift. Caca. Gastly floated closer, curious. Ghost fire techniques. Is this also for me? Gastly stretched out its tongue toward the book. Stop. Johan quickly pulled the book away. This is a book, not food. It's definitely not a toxic orb. Thankfully, he was quick enough, or Gastly would have left its mark on the book. Gastly laughed awkwardly. I was just testing. Johan rolled his eyes at Gastly and flipped open the book for a quick look. Handwritten notes like these were different from regular trademark records. They contained personal insights and experiences from a trainer's use of a move, and how much one could learn from them depended on the trainer's and the Pokémon's understanding. Flannery's grandfather, Mura, was once one of the Elite Four of the Hone region, specializing in Fire-type Pokémon. His expertise in raising Fire types was undoubtedly top tier in the Pokémon world. Will-O-Wisp, in particular, was a Fire-type move, and Mura's understanding of it would far exceed Johan's or Gastly's. Johan began reading the first page. Will-O-Wisp is still fire. Rather than calling it ghost fire, it's more appropriate to call it strange fire. The fur from a nine-tail's tail, the wick from a chandelure, Cubone's bone powder. Seeing these materials listed, Johan felt a headache coming on. According to the notes, these ingredients could help Pokémon better master the move Will-O-Wisp. But as Johan read further, it started feeling like things were getting a bit unconventional. Especially the last one, Salamanque's X-gland. Is this really legitimate advice? Did the old man actually try this? But next to him, Gastly's eyes were shining, clearly intrigued and eager to experiment. Johan quickly flipped through the book. Fortunately, the rest of it gradually became more normal, detailing the techniques and experiences for training a Pokémon to use Will-O-Wisp. Johan found the information to be quite helpful. After finishing a quick read-through, he felt he had gained a deeper understanding of how to train Gastly in using Will-O-Wisp. Once this stage of training is complete, perhaps I'll register as a League-certified trainer with Gastly. As he mused on this, Johan heard a voice in the distance. Skarmory, use wing attack. A Skarmory clad in silver armor swooped down from the sky, its gleaming wings striking the opponent with a heavy blow. Johan hadn't expected Steven to join the battles too. With his strength, taking the top spot in the first-year battle class should be a simple matter. However, Johan narrowed his eyes. Using a Skarmory that knows moves like that, this battle seems a bit wasted, doesn't it? Chapter 35, Dirty Tactics. Not really. Morning. Warm sunlight peeked through the gaps in the curtains of the Pokémon Center, casting a soft, gentle warmth on Johan's face. Caw. Gastly, as usual, licked Johan's cheek affectionately with its tongue, waking him up with its usual morning greeting. Under Steven's somewhat perplexed gaze, Johan shivered slightly. Still half asleep, Johan reached into his bag on the nightstand and pulled out a cherry berry, which could cure paralysis. He popped it into his mouth, feeling the spicy heat spread through his mouth, before slowly opening his slightly reddened eyes, his expression remaining calm. He nodded to Gastly in thanks. Thanks. Caw. Gastly gleefully floated around Johan. No big deal. Steven, on the other hand, couldn't help but wipe a bead of sweat from his forehead. So, those berries in his bag are for himself? Cherry berries to cure paralysis, Pecha berries to cure poisoning. What about other status ailments? Gastly couldn't put Johan to sleep, and Gastly wouldn't use will-o-wisp to burn him, but confusion, well, if you're confused, a berry won't make a difference anyway. Steven thought to himself, Johan's movements, he's so used to this it's almost heartbreaking. Yesterday's exploration had gone smoothly. Although busy, it had been a relatively easy day for Johan. However, the evening had been tiring, as he had been dragged to a late meeting by Duff. After they freshened up, Johan and Steven headed to the Pokémon Center's cafeteria, which provided free breakfast. Here, this is for you. Sitting down at the table, Johan poured a cup of moo milk for Gastly and handed Steven a folded piece of paper. What's this? It's my tactical suggestions for your Skarmory. Skarmory. Steven was taken aback, visibly surprised. Johan, you know battle strategies? No, I mean, you even understand strategies for Skarmory. Steven had long stopped seeing Johan as just a psychology teacher. While Johan's expertise in Pokémon psychology was undoubtedly impressive, Steven had come to realize that Johan was also quite skilled in raising Pokémon and in Pokémon battles. Curious, Steven unfolded the paper and began reading through the notes. Spikes, Stealth Rock, Whirlwind, Substitute, Roost, Taunt, Iron Defense, Protect. Hey! The contents were completely different from what Steven had expected. There wasn't a single offensive move listed. You don't need my advice for offensive moves, Johan explained simply, seeing the confusion on Steven's face. I'm sure you're more experienced in that area. Steven nodded, though he was still a bit puzzled. But, these moves? Sure, your Skarmory might not know all of them yet, but with your skills, teaching it these moves should be easy. I still don't quite understand, Steven admitted honestly. Johan paused, then gave an example. Let's say you're up against Flannery. She's a classic example of an offensive trainer, and she has a type advantage over you. While you're not afraid of her, it's not ideal to go for an all-out attack. Instead, you could have Skarmory set up Spikes and Stealth Rock first. Then attack. No, then use Whirlwind to blow them away. Steven was quick to catch on. He was used to a certain style of battling, but Johan's explanation was opening his eyes to a different, more strategic approach. He realized that he was about to learn some game-changing tactics. Just the idea of repeatedly using Whirlwind to cycle opponents out sounded like it could seriously frustrate anyone. With Skarmory's natural bulk, if your opponent relies on physical attacks, use Iron Defense to bolster your defenses. If they're more of a special attacker, then use Substitute, Roost, and Protect to stall them out. Johan went on to explain some of the core strategies behind a hazard setting team and how to utilize Skarmory to stall effectively. Honestly, the concept of a hazard setting team seemed to suit Steven's lineup quite well. Not just with Skarmory, there were plenty of other ways to build on this strategy with his other Pokémon. And this was just a single battle strategy. In double battles or larger scale battles, the tactics could shift entirely. I thought you only had deep strategic insights for Gastly. I didn't expect. Steven trailed off, his expression complicated, but there was a gleam of excitement in his eyes. It was as if Johan had opened the door to a whole new world for him. Everything seemed so clear. Gastly's tactics. Johan shook his head. Gastly still has a long way to go. It'll take a lot more training before it can use tactics like Toxic, Protect, and Substitute effectively. As a seasoned Pokémon enthusiast, Johan had countless strategies in mind once Gastly evolved into Gengar. Especially in this world, where there was no restriction of just 4 moves for each Pokémon. Toxic Stall? That would just be the foundation. Caca. Hearing Johan mention its future strategy, Gastly's eyes began to shine. It was at this moment that Steven noticed Flannery and Roxanne approaching, carrying their breakfasts. They had likely overheard the conversation. A large bead of sweat rolled down Flannery's forehead. Johan also realized they had arrived, clearing his throat as he concluded, "Anyway, if you have any questions later, feel free to ask." After all, Steven had given him that toxic orb. It only seemed fair. This strategy is so dirty. Johan, it's too underhanded. The idea of setting up hazards like spikes and stealth rock, paired with Skarmory's whirlwind loop, left Flannery feeling utterly frustrated. She sat down at the table, grumbling as she imagined having to face such tactics in battle. Meanwhile, Roxanne looked deep in thought. Dirty? Just this? This was nothing. Johan exchanged a glance with Gastly. Is it really that dirty? Caca. Gastly shook its head vigorously. It's about as dirty as my sneak attack tactics. Flannery's exaggerated reaction was likely because Johan had used her as an example. The hypothetical scenario had hit a bit too close to home for her. Teacher, you can't do this. Steven's already strong enough. If you teach him strategies like these. Flannery stared at Johan intensely. So, when will you teach me? Johan. After breakfast, Johan took Gastly to a quiet spot for training. Today's plan was for a relaxed field trip, with all the classes and teachers gathered together. With so many people, his presence wouldn't be missed. After briefly informing Duff, Johan slipped away. Of course, he didn't plan to go far. If anything came up, he would be able to return immediately. Caca. How are we training today? Gastly was buzzing with anticipation. Especially after hearing about all the battle strategies that morning, Gastly was more eager than ever to start. Forget sneak attack tactics. Johan pulled out a small box. When he opened it, it revealed several energy cubes. Some were a deep red, others a vibrant orange. Johan explained, I couldn't get things like Ninetales tail fur or Chandelure's wick, and I'm not sure if they're even reliable. So I asked Sayaka to help me get these special energy cubes. They'll assist in today's training. This small box of specially made cubes had cost Johan a whopping 1,000 poke dollars. Caca, caca. Gastly's eyes sparkled with excitement. For me? It immediately opened its mouth wide. Gastly. Johan tossed the first cube to it. Awoo. Gastly swallowed it in one gulp. Sweet. Spicy. Gastly's eyes sparkled. Tisk caca. It's a bit spicy, but delicious. It signaled Johan to keep them coming. This one's made from dragon fire berries. It'll boost your special attack, but it's pretty spicy. Johan warned, it might also be a bit bitter. Gastly hated anything bitter. Caca, caca. Come on, let's do this. Awoo. As Johan tossed over the fiery red cube, Gastly eagerly bit down. But as it chewed, its expression began to freeze. How's it taste? Johan asked curiously. Gastly's face flushed a deep red, contorting into a bitter expression. Ca. Ca. So bitter. Tears streamed from Gastly's eyes. Chapter 36, My Gastly is Growing Up. Caca, caca. So bitter, so bitter. Gastly muttered under its breath while conjuring 2 ghostly blue flames, launching them at a nearby boulder from tricky angles. The flames exploded upon contact with the stone, scattering into shimmering blue sparks before fizzling out midair. The rock now bore a sizable dent and was charred black. In this moment, it wasn't clear if Gastly's rapid improvement in will-o-wisp mastery was fueled by the bitter taste or the spicy burn of the training food it had just eaten. Johan had noticed long ago that his Gastly learned quickly and grew at an extraordinary pace. Whether it was due to innate talent or the result of Gastly's 1,000-year slumber, it had a unique potential, now blooming into full force. Moreover, Johan could see through his Pokédex that Gastly was in excellent condition, which was a key factor in a Pokémon's growth. However, Johan couldn't shake the feeling that Gastly was venting its frustrations on that rock, as if blaming it for the bitter training cubes. This suspicion made Johan take a couple of cautious steps back. Caw. With gritted teeth, Gastly gathered a ghostly flame the size of its own head, hurling it forcefully at the stone. Boom! Sparks scattered everywhere. This particular use of Will-O-Wisp didn't quite match Johan's initial plan for the move, but he chose to turn a blind eye for now. After all, Gastly needed to vent. Johan had made it endure one of its least favorite flavors, bitterness. He hadn't expected Gastly to endure it so well and had even prepared to comfort it. My little Gastly is growing up, Johan thought, feeling a sudden wave of pride as if his child had finally matured. However, the oversized Will-O-Wisp caused flames to scatter across the grassy field, and some of the stray sparks landed in a nearby patch of dry grass. Gastly! Johan quickly intervened. Causing a forest fire would be the least of their worries. If they ended up in front of Officer Jenny for questioning, that would be a much bigger problem. Caw. Luckily, Gastly was mindful. It immediately doused the few flames that looked dangerous. But just as it was about to ignore a small, harmless ember, Johan suddenly shouted, "Watch out!" Hey? Gastly didn't know what was happening, but it trusted Johan without question and swiftly darted backward. Shay! A dark shadow shot out from the underbrush. It was a massive, sinister-looking snake with sleek black scales, sections of its body covered in gold armor-like plates. Several scars ran along its body, and its crimson fangs gleamed dangerously as it wielded a tail sharp as a blade. A Seviper. However, this Seviper wasn't in the best condition. One of the ghostly flames from Gastly's training had landed on it, burning a patch of its head, leaving it in a burned state. The reason Johan had noticed it at all was that the Pokédex had alerted him when Seviper made its move to strike. Seviper. Type: Poison. Ability: Shed Skin. Moves known: Bind, Swagger, Bite, Lick, Poison Tail, Feint, Screech, Glare, Poison Fang. Mood: Angry, embarrassed, it had spotted prey and was planning to ambush. Status: Good health, burned, due to Will-O-Wisp. Friendship: -50, you were already marked as its prey. Turns out, the commotion from Gastly's training had caught Seviper's attention, and it had been lying in wait for the right moment to strike. Unfortunately for it, one of Gastly's stray flames hit it instead. Shay! Seviper's eyes gleamed red with fury as it locked onto Johan, its body coiled tightly like a loaded spring, ready to strike. It was clear, Gastly wasn't on its menu, Johan was. Caw. Noticing Seviper's intent, Gastly's gaze hardened. Suddenly. Whoosh! Seviper shot forward, aiming directly at Johan like an arrow, moving with terrifying speed. Gastly, confuse Ray. Johan remained calm and didn't back down, giving his command swiftly. In his mind, Seviper targeting him was actually advantageous. This way, Gastly could perform better. Caw. Gastly let out a mischievous laugh, summoning a small, shimmering orb that glowed with eerie light. It shot toward Seviper, its path erratic and difficult to track. However, Seviper was an experienced hunter. Sensing the threat from Gastly's move, it abruptly stopped, causing the confused Ray to miss. Realizing it needed to deal with Gastly first, Seviper turned its focus. Its body coiled tightly, glowing with a menacing red light as it hissed at Gastly, preparing to strike again. It had used Swagger. Gastly, hide underground. Before Seviper could react, Gastly smirked and vanished beneath the earth, leaving Seviper confused. Suddenly. Caw. Gastly's voice echoed from behind. Seviper twisted its head, its crimson fangs glowing with a toxic light poison fang. But what it saw wasn't Gastly. It was a terrifying, enlarged face contorted with malice. Spite. Terror seized Seviper, and it froze mid-attack. As its body stiffened in fear, its vision began to blur. Its eyelids grew heavy, and its coiled form slowly loosened. Hypnosis. This time, Gastly's hypnosis was different from when it used the move on Flannery's Houndour. It was enhanced by Johan's psychological insight. It's afraid of Zangoose, Johan remarked. Seviper and Zangoose had always been mortal enemies. Caw. Gastly finally understood. It had seen a Zangoose before. Soon, Seviper, half-conscious, began to see what it feared most. A Zangoose was charging straight at it, claws ready to strike. Instinctively, it tried to retaliate. But before it could act, More Zangoose appeared. Hundreds of them. An overwhelming tide of Zangoose surged toward Seviper like a flood. Shat! Shat! With a thud, Seviper collapsed onto the ground, twitching violently. Foam gathered at the corners of its mouth. Its body began to glow faintly as its shed skin ability took effect, curing its burn. But it didn't wake up. The mental trauma was too great, compounded by its fear of Zangoose. Pokémon with strong wills or no natural enemies could handle something like this, but for Seviper knowing its enemy was out there and having it exploited was another story. With Seviper out of commission, Johan scanned the area. Looks like we wandered a bit too far from the town. Let's head back, Gastly. Johan turned toward Movili City. Caw. Gastly, returning to its normal size, followed him closely. The Seviper incident had eased the tension Gastly had built up during its earlier training, leaving it in a much better mood. Caw. Are we just going to leave it? Gastly asked, curious. That Seviper will probably hide for months before it feels safe enough to come out again, Johan chuckled. Consider it a lesson learned. It wouldn't surprise Johan if Seviper started having nightmares about Zangoose every time it tried to sleep. Caw. Gastly giggled mischievously, glancing back at the Seviper twitching on the ground, eyes narrowing playfully. It licked its tongue. Serves it right for targeting Johan. Nothing's that easy. About half an hour later, Seviper stirred, its body still twitching slightly. It opened its eyes wide in terror, realizing the Zangoose weren't real. With a sigh of relief, it began to relax. Then... Shat! Seviper let out a blood-curdling scream that echoed through the area. Where are my fangs? Chapter 37, Toxic Training Method? Caw. Gastly suddenly popped its head out from behind Johan, wearing a fierce expression. Normally, Johan was used to Gastly's mischievous jump scares, but this time, he paused for a moment. Gastly wasn't just pulling a usual prank, it had transformed into a vampire-like appearance. Although only its head was visible, black mist formed the shape of a cape around it, and its sharp, crimson fangs gleamed, looking incredibly familiar. Wait, are those Seviper's fangs? Caw. Gastly floated with a smug expression, clearly proud of its spoils. Johan couldn't help but smile, both amused and exasperated. Although Seviper's fangs will grow back, you really went and pulled them out. Apparently, Gastly had taken Seviper's most prized possessions, its venomous fangs, which were crucial for its attacks and venom delivery. The fangs also carried potent toxins. Seviper, which would have normally hidden for a few months to recover from the trauma, would now need even more time to regenerate its fangs. After all, it had lost its weapons. You better not poison yourself while you're at it. Caw. Gastly flashed a look of how could that happen? After all, it was a poison-type Pokémon, not some other species vulnerable to poison. Johan knew this, of course, so his warning was more playful than serious. Besides, Gastly had a quadruple resistance to poison. Caw. Gastly floated around in front of Johan, the black mist surrounding it swirling with energy. Hey? What's going on? Suddenly, Johan heard a strange slurping sound coming from Gastly, as if it were slurping jelly, followed by a few chewing noises. It sounded like Gastly was munching on something soft and gooey. Johan's expression turned a little odd. Did Gastly just eat the venom from Seviper's fangs? Caw. After a couple more slurps and a satisfied gulp, Gastly's white eyes lit up with excitement. Surprisingly tasty. But Gastly wasn't done. After savoring the venom for a moment, it started to channel its move haze, with purple streaks of venom coursing through the black mist around it. However, instead of expelling the haze into the air, Gastly condensed it into the severed fangs. At that moment, small black and purple bubbles appeared at the tips of the crimson fangs, and thick drops of venom dripped onto the ground, sizzling as they burned small holes into the stone path beneath them. Caw. Gastly grinned broadly and waggled its eyebrows at Johan, clearly showing off its improved venom. Johan, surprised by this development, stopped in his tracks and rubbed his chin thoughtfully. Not bad, compressing the venom into the fangs has made it much stronger, he said, impressed. Then he asked Gastly, did you use the toxic orb? Caw. Gastly blinked innocently. Nope. Johan nodded slightly, talking to himself as he pieced it together. Even if Gastly compressed haze into a liquid form, the toxicity shouldn't be this potent. Is it because of the fangs? Or is it the result of ingesting Seviper's venom? Curious, Johan gave Gastly another instruction. Try using the toxic orb's effect this time. Although confused, Gastly followed Johan's request. It wiggled its tongue for a moment, then pulled out the deep purple toxic orb it had stashed away. With a few licks, Gastly reabsorbed the orb back into its body and then began to charge haze again. This time, as the venom dripped from the fangs, the drops became even thicker and darker, and the poison's corrosive strength was visibly more intense. The experiment was a success. Johan's eyes brightened with realization. Perhaps they really could use this method to train Gastly to master toxic. With this thought, Johan quickened his pace toward Mowgli City. Caw. Noticing Johan speeding up, Gastly quickly caught up. Why are we running? Johan cast a glance behind them, eyeing the deep black scorch marks left by the toxic drops on the stone path. If we don't run, we're going to get caught. Understanding Johan's glance, Gastly immediately flew ahead, adopting an innocent expression as if to say, "It wasn't me, I swear." But soon, Gastly had a mischievous thought, and a sly grin crossed its face. It floated back to Johan and asked with a playful glint in its eyes. Caw. By the way, how long will it take for Seviper's fangs to grow back? Back at the Mowgli City Pokémon Center, Johan approached Nurse Joy. Due to the incident at Mt. Chimney and the Academy's arrangements, Johan, who was not yet a registered Pokémon trainer with the League, was finally able to have Gastly undergo a proper Pokémon health check for free, of course. Johan stood outside the large glass window, watching as Gastly, looking rather confused, was guided by Nurse Joy and Chansey through a series of advanced medical instruments. He couldn't help but smile. Gastly, despite having experienced technology like computers and phones under Johan's guidance, was clearly bewildered by the large, high-tech machines in front of it. But beneath Johan's amusement, there was also a hint of worry that he couldn't quite hide. Gastly had been asleep for so long, has it fully recovered? Has my training been appropriate, or could it have left hidden problems? What if the checkup reveals something concerning? Gastly has eaten so many strange things, could it be feeling unwell? Inside the examination room, Gastly, though used to gadgets like phones, found these medical instruments far more intimidating. Its confusion and unease were genuine. But whenever Gastly looked up and saw Johan through the glass window, standing calmly outside, it felt reassured. And besides, Gastly, we'll move to this machine next, okay? Be careful not to bump into anything, Nurse Joy said in her soft, gentle voice. Caw. Nurse Joy smells really nice. Gastly's eyes sparkled as it obediently followed her instructions. Seeing that Gastly was cooperating well and that Nurse Joy showed no signs of concern, Johan let out a small sigh of relief and pulled out his phone, which had buzzed several times during the checkup. Evie eats cabbage, if it's because you're busy, no worries. I can come find you. You're in the Hone region, right? Evie eats cabbage, Phoebus is looking much better these past few days, but something feels off today. Video.mp4. Meeting in person? No. We're just internet buddies. Johan opened the video message. In just a few days, Phoebus's scales had become noticeably more vibrant compared to before, but... Grain in the field, have you considered that Phoebus may just be having digestive issues from overeating? Not only had Phoebus become shinier, but it also seemed to have gained some weight. That detail might not be obvious to someone who sees Phoebus every day. Grain in the field, also, try not to keep Phoebus with too many other water-type Pokémon. It's likely feeling self-conscious after just beginning to overcome its insecurities, and it might be having trouble finding a private bathroom. The door to the examination room slid open, and Johan pocketed his phone. Caw. Gastly floated toward him, happy as ever. Johan, your Gastly is in excellent condition, Nurse Joy said with a warm smile. Thank you. Johan exhaled deeply, relieved. However, try not to feed it too much for now. It might be experiencing some indigestion. Johan glanced at Gastly, who looked completely baffled. Got it. Oh, and one more thing. Just as Johan was about to thank her again and leave, Nurse Joy called out to him. Your Camerupt has woken up, and coincidentally, Elite 4 member Genji has arrived in Mowgli City. He hopes you can assist in the investigation. Okay, wait. Elite 4 member Genji. Chapter 38, Is Hypnosis Legit? Drake, the current head of the Hone Elite Four and a true Dragon-type master. As Johan walked toward the Lavaridge gym from the Pokémon Center, he reviewed in his mind what he knew about Drake. Most of this information was from his previous life. After coming to the Pokémon world, he learned more through the internet. Not only was Drake the head of Hone's Elite Four, but he also oversaw the region's officer corps, granting him significant authority. An officer. Johan knew that people like Lance were also officers of the Kanto League, and in time, Lance would become the Dragon-type Elite Four of Johto, well, Dragon-type, at least. The fact that the incident with Camerupt had caught Drake's attention indicated that this situation might be more serious than Johan had initially thought. Caw. Gastly, hiding in Johan's coat, sensed his concern and asked softly. Nothing to worry about, Johan replied. But Johan wouldn't share these burdens with Gastly. Even if he talked about it, nothing would change, it was all just speculation anyway. Besides, there was no point in adding extra stress to Gastly, who already had plenty on its plate with training and battles. In fact, Johan wouldn't force Gastly to train or battle if it didn't want to. Taking care of a Gastly without having it train wasn't much of a financial burden for him. Oh, by the way, Johan added, we're about to meet another very powerful Elite Four member. Try to behave yourself. Caw. Another Elite Four? Gastly's mind flashed back to the image of Flannery and her grandfather arguing. Are Elite Four really that amazing? Meanwhile, Johan decided that if things got too complicated, he'd assist as much as he could, but otherwise, he would steer clear. He had no desire to get swept up in events that could crush a small-time trainer like him. Before long, Johan arrived at the Lavaridge gym once again. In front of the grand red-tiled, white-bricked gym with wine-colored pillars, several police cars were parked. Officer Jenny. Johan greeted Jenny politely as he entered the gym. She looked up from the report she was studying, her faithful Growlithe sitting obediently beside her. At the sound of Johan's voice, her expression softened slightly, and she nodded. You're here, Johan. She gestured toward a corner of the gym's courtyard. There, he could see the large figure of Camerupt, along with two older men. One was, of course, Flannery's grandfather, the gym leader of Lavaridge, Mura. The other was a man wearing a white captain's hat, a long black captain's coat with a high collar, and a floor-length hem. This man was none other than Drake, the Elite Four's Dragon-type master. Led by Officer Jenny, Johan walked toward the two men. Their approach was soon noticed. Mura introduced them with a smile. Drake, this is Johan. Johan, this is Drake of the Elite Four. Buzz. Immediately, Johan felt a sharp gaze shoot out from under Drake's hat brim. It was a look that spoke of someone who had weathered many storms, mixed with a hint of appraisal. However, the intense scrutiny quickly faded, and the atmosphere returned to normal. Johan maintained his composure and nodded politely. Mura, Drake. But inside Johan's coat, Gastly was a bit tense. Caw. Whoa, this old guy means business. Haha. Drake laughed heartily, his voice rough but full of energy. I heard you and the son of Mr. Stone handled the situation together? Not bad, not bad. And don't forget Flannery and Roxanne, Mura added from the side. Drake shot Mura a sidelong glance. You, be quiet. You're still the Elite Four. I'm retired. Mura snapped back. You're still an Elite Four. And as the Lavaridge gym leader, you didn't even notice the trouble at Mt. Chimney. You left it to a bunch of young folks to clean up after you. I'll be telling Phoebe about this. She'll deduct points from your gym's performance rating this year. Mura glared back. Deduct points? Let her come here and say it to my face. She will, and you'll lose points for sure. You. Watching the two elderly men bicker, Johan felt a headache coming on and glanced at Officer Jenny. She gave him a helpless look. This is why I was standing so far away. Roar. The bickering grew so loud that Camerupt, already unsettled, became agitated, stomping its feet and causing small flames to sputter from the volcanic hump on its back. At the same time, Johan's Pokédex displayed Camerupt's details once again. Camerupt. Type, Fire/Ground. Ability, Magma Armor. Moves, Rock Slide, Fissure, Flamethrower, Roar, Tackle, Ember, Focus Energy, Stomp, Lava Plume, Amnesia, Smokescreen, Earth Power, Takedown. Mood, uneasy, in pain, it misses its home and family. Condition, weak, its body has some anomalies and may never fully recover. Friendship, -20, even though it doesn't remember you, it clearly doesn't like you. Ruoar. Camerupt's body started to heat up, but neither Drake nor Mura seemed to notice or care about its distress. They continued arguing as if completely oblivious to the Pokémon's growing agitation. Seeing that Camerupt was on the verge of attacking, Johan sighed softly. Gastly. Caw. Black mist swirled out from Johan's coat as Gastly floated into view, laughing mischievously as it faced Camerupt. The two Pokémon locked eyes, and Gastly cast Hypnosis. Camerupt's movements began to slow, and Johan approached, placing his hands gently on Camerupt's neck and head, speaking to it in soft whispers. It was like painting a picture. Dusk settled on a golden meadow, bathed in the soft light of the setting sun. A warm breeze carried the gentle hum of Camerupt and Numel as they grazed lazily under the sky, surrounded by peaceful evening hues. Camerupt slowly calmed down. It closed its eyes. A soft smile of contentment appeared on its face. The sounds of the bickering behind them faded into silence as Drake, Mura, and Jenny watched Johan release his hold on Camerupt, each with different expressions on their faces. Gastly, satisfied with the results, turned around to see Salam Ince, wings blood-red and exuding a murderous aura, standing to the left. And Typhlosion, arms crossed, flames licking its body, standing to the right. Both stared at Gastly and Johan with scrutinizing gazes. Caw. Sigma, LLL. Gastly was utterly shocked. These two mighty ones. Could they be Elite Four? Johan, however, remained calm, grabbing the stunned Gastly and walking right past the two towering presences. Caw. Gastly whispered nervously, its voice barely audible. How are you so calm, Johan? Johan gave it a sidelong glance and slightly raised his hand. His hand was trembling. Not bad. I heard you're a Pokémon psychologist. You've got some skill, Drake praised, admiring the now calm Camerupt. Then he added, but, is that hypnosis legit? It was the first time Drake had seen a Pokémon affected by hypnosis look so happy. That contented smile, it was unsettlingly soothing. Caw. Before Johan could respond, Gastly jumped in indignantly. What do you mean, legit? What kind of question is that? Is there even a legit way to use hypnosis? Johan felt that this was going in a strange direction and gently pushed Gastly behind him. Ahem, sorry, Drake. We've already told Mura everything that happened. Is there anything else you need to know? Johan asked, steering the conversation back on track. Well, as you might have guessed, Camerupt isn't the only Pokémon affected like this. But we haven't found a good way to deal with the others. I was hoping you and your Gastly could. I refuse. Johan cut him off without hesitation. Drake, you know this is no simple matter. Calming one enraged Pokémon is not as easy as it looks. Gastly and I are just ordinary trainers. We want to help, but we don't have the energy for something this big. Caw. Gastly nodded vigorously, as if its life depended on it. It's exhausting, okay? And those Pokémon are really scary. I'll pay you 10,000 Poke dollars per Pokémon. Deal. Caw. Sigma, LLL. Chapter 39, The God of Reimbursement. Caw. Gastly floated over, curious, as Johan sat writing at his desk, phone in hand, watching a battle video. Gastly, meanwhile, was sipping on a bottle of digestive liquid given by Nurse Joy. What's he busy with? Ever since they returned, Johan had been hunched over, writing non-stop. Without lifting his head, Johan replied, medical report. Camerupt's case file, he added, sensing Gastly's confusion. Gastly still didn't quite understand. What's the point of writing a case file? Then, Johan finished the last word, neatly arranging it alongside several other forms. Caw. What are those? Gastly continued sipping on the sour-sweet digestive liquid, already having finished half a dozen bottles. Reimbursement forms. Since Johan had wrapped up, he didn't mind sharing his work with Gastly. This was something Drake had suggested. Treating Pokémon that were mentally and physically injured counted as working for the League, so Johan had to follow League protocol and submit reimbursement requests. Caw. Gastly peered at one of the forms, its misty fingers pointing at the section labeled clothing damage. Is that really necessary? Gastly remembered Johan's clothes had gotten torn while climbing Mt Chimney and passing through some cracks. Just reporting the facts, Johan said casually. Caca. But why is it listed as ×3? Stevens and Flannery's clothes too. I'm filing for them as well, Johan answered smoothly. Ah. Gastly nodded, realizing that Stevens' clothing was indeed quite expensive. Caca. What about this? It pointed at the line reading, 10 boxes of energy cubes, 5 crates of Moo milk used to calm Heatran. Weren't you the one who only used a bottle of milk and a few cubes to calm Heatran? Wasn't it just 10 cubes? Each box of energy cubes usually contains 100 pieces. Remaining calm, Johan explained, do you think anyone will believe you calmed down a legendary Pokémon with just 1 bottle of Moo milk and 10 cubes? What if someone actually tries to replicate that and gets themselves hurt? It's for their safety. Besides, who do you think those energy cubes and milk are really for? Caca. Gastly's eyes widened. All for me. Of course, some of it will go to the injured Pokémon, Johan added. He wasn't about to take food meant for Pokémon, so he figured it was best to request a bit more. Gulp. Gastly swallowed nervously, then noticed another line. Luxury balls ×10 used to capture Camerupt. Even though Gastly had braced itself, seeing the line about using 10 luxury balls still caught it off guard. Only a few trainers get lucky with 1 ball. Considering Camerupt's rampage, it's perfectly reasonable to use 10 balls to capture it, don't you think? Johan shrugged. This reimbursement form was entirely based on realistic circumstances. It was all perfectly reasonable. And as for the fact that the actual ball used had been a regular Pokeball, not a luxury ball. Well, Johan had thought about writing Cherish Ball, but considering the league's limits, he decided to settle on luxury balls. After all, Steven, being the heir to Devon Corporation, would naturally carry a few luxury balls, right? It's just that, by sheer luck, Johan had managed to catch Camerupt with a regular Pokeball. Pure luck. Gastly didn't quite grasp all the intricacies. But it was deeply impressed. In addition to these items, Johan also filed claims for many other things. For example, he listed the Pecha berries used to treat Camerupt's burn, the healing sprays for the injuries sustained by Gastly and Stevens' Pokémon during their battle with Camerupt, and some medicine he used to calm Camerupt physically during treatment. See? Perfectly reasonable. Caca. Is this really okay? Even Gastly, who usually didn't worry about such things, couldn't help but feel a little nervous. Isn't this a bit much? Of course, it's a problem, Johan admitted as he stacked the papers and slipped them into a file folder. What? Gastly blinked. Then why submit them? Johan smiled slyly. If the league staff were the ones reviewing this, it would definitely get rejected. But Drake is the one handling it, so it's different. In the home league, were there many people with more authority than Drake? With Drake's signature on the reimbursement forms, no one would dare raise an objection. That's why Johan hadn't bargained or hesitated when Drake made his offer. On one hand, Drake's offer was more than generous. On the other hand, it was all part of an unspoken understanding between them. Drake had once been an ordinary sailor with a dream of conquering the seas with his partner Seviper. After surviving a shipwreck, he was saved by a Drago Knight, which ignited his passion for dragon-type Pokémon and led him to the path of a Pokémon trainer. Because of this, Drake always carried a deep sense of empathy for Pokémon. When he saw how Johan had managed to make a rampaging Camerupt smile so peacefully, it stirred something within him. That was the true reason Drake had asked Johan for help. After all, while Johan was a rare Pokémon psychologist, the league had plenty of people in that profession. But none of them had Johan's ability to truly and precisely calm an enraged Pokémon. Moreover, Johan's reimbursement forms were primarily aimed at benefiting the Pokémon whether Gastly or the injured Camerupt. That was the tacit agreement between Johan and Drake. Of course, most importantly, Drake himself had subtly hinted that Johan could ask for more, since the injured Pokémon would also need a steady supply of food. Gastly didn't understand all this. But it trusted Johan completely. If Johan said it was fine, then it was fine. And so, Gastly suddenly understood. I get it now. A moment later. Caca. Crash. A sharp cracking sound echoed through the room. Johan froze mid-motion, hardly able to believe his eyes. Gastly's prized possession, the phone it had been holding, was now shattered on the floor, broken into several pieces. You. Johan's forehead pulsed with a vein of frustration. But Gastly just looked calm and unbothered, as if it had never liked that old, slow phone with its terrible internet connection. Using hypnosis earlier was too tiring, and I dropped it by accident. Johan's face darkened as he ground his teeth. Did you ever think that even without breaking the phone, we could have added it to the form? Caca. Gastly, Sigma. And did you think about how long it will take for the reimbursement to come through? What are you going to use in the meantime? Gastly, Sigma. Sigh. Johan exhaled, trying to calm himself, before taking out the reimbursement form again. He calmly wrote down, damaged phone. Gastly let out a relieved sigh, but then it froze again when Johan wrote, phones ×2. Shallow. Its understanding had been too shallow. Caca. Gastly raised a thumbs up, its misty hand giving Johan a nod of approval. Reimbursement, after all, was an art form. I hereby crown you the god of reimbursement of the Sinnoh legends. Chapter 40, It's Toxic. PFHH. At the Fall Arbor Gym, Drake spat out the warm, sugary milk he had been drinking, spraying it all over the face of the man sitting across from him, none other than former Elite Four member, Mulder. Mulder stared, wide-eyed in shock, as veins of irritation bulged on his forehead. Ha ha ha, this kid, Drake laughed, completely unfazed by what he'd done. Mulder, wiping his face, caught a glimpse of what Drake had been holding. Reimbursement form? Since when are you handling finances? No, Brawley handles that, Drake replied. Hearing this, Mulder sighed in relief. Back when he was still an Elite Four member, part of his job was overseeing the league's finances. Being a rather meticulous person, he and Drake often butted heads over reimbursement requests. If Drake were in charge of Hoen's finances now, Mulder imagined the region's economy would be in shambles. The chairman doesn't let me near the finances, Drake said, sipping his warm, sugary milk again. Mulder gave him a long, thoughtful look. The chairman's right, he muttered. Everyone within the league knew of Drake's infamous nickname among the higher UPS, the Reimbursement King. You don't understand a thing, Drake said, glancing sideways at Mulder. Do you even know how hard our investigators work? You have no idea what they witness every day. Take this incident with Camerupt, for example. It became like that for no apparent reason. Don't you think it's pitiful? If we don't apply for enough subsidies, who knows if it can even survive once it's returned to the wild? Mulder fell silent. Of course, he knew Drake well after working alongside him for decades. And it was true that League investigators had one of the toughest jobs, constantly on their feet, dealing with problems no ordinary person could imagine. That's why, back when Mulder was in charge of the finances, he never truly held back the money or supplies Drake requested, even though his reimbursement forms were always rather extravagant. Print 50 copies of this reimbursement form, Drake handed the form to a nearby assistant dressed in a sailor's uniform. From now on, fill them out according to this template. Yes, Drake. The assistant nodded. Thus, the field trip that had caused Johan some concern finally came to an end. Despite the unexpected situation with Camerupt, the overall impact had been minimal. In fact, it had landed Johan a nice side job, opening up a new income stream. After handing in the final attendance sheet, Johan and a few other teachers watched the students leave one by one. Some were riding dodrios, arguing as they ran. Others were riding ponitas, leaving trails of sparks in their wake. A few even rode rahorns, which weren't exactly faster than walking. Now that Johan thought about it, once Gastly evolved into Jengar, maybe it could ride on an Alolan Raticate like Acerola. Sensing his evil intent, Gastly suddenly let out a loud shriek. Caw-caw, caw-caw. What's that look in your eyes? So wicked. Ahem, nothing, just thought of something funny. Once the students had all left, Johan headed home with Gastly. Upon reaching their apartment complex, they noticed a large orange Pokémon sitting idly by the old flower bed at the bottom of the stairs. It was resting its small arms against its head, looking utterly bored. Chubby. Ahem, no, it was a Dragonite. A pseudo-legendary Pokémon from Kanto. If Johan's neighborhood weren't so rundown and remote, a Dragonite appearing here would definitely have attracted a crowd. The Dragonite noticed Johan approaching and perked up, rummaging through its satchel for something. Finally, it pulled out a crumpled photo, carefully smoothing it out with its pudgy claws. After comparing the photo to Johan, Dragonite gave a satisfied nod. Boo! It's him, no doubt. Dragonite waddled over to Johan and fished out a package from its bag. Is this for me? Johan asked. Boo. Dragonite nodded. Johan glanced at the package and realized what it was. It was the reimbursement items he had requested. He hadn't expected them to arrive so quickly. As he accepted the package, Johan handed Dragonite a few energy cubes in thanks. Dragonite's earlier annoyance vanished instantly, and it happily tossed the cubes into its mouth. Dragonite. Waving goodbye, Dragonite flapped its wings and flew off in an instant. No wonder they call it the Dragon-type Elite Four members Pokémon. He even uses Dragonite to deliver packages, Johan remarked as he watched the Dragonite disappear into the sky. Gastly, however, looked confused. Caw. How does something with such small wings fly so fast? That was a tough question to answer, so Johan quickly changed the subject. Come on, let's open the package. Caw. Gastly's attention immediately shifted. New phone. New phone. New phone. Excited, it zoomed up the stairs. Though it was just a small package, it seemed to utilize some form of spatial technology. Inside were boxes of energy cubes, crates of moo milk, various berries, medicine, pokeballs. So many items that they couldn't even fit on the table and were spread out across the floor. Caw. Gastly gleefully rolled around in the energy cubes and moo milk, clutching a brand new phone. Gastly. Johan also opened his new phone and logged into his league account. The first thing he checked was his paper. The hype around his published paper had finally started to die down, though it was still trending near the top. After skimming through some of the other research papers, Johan began to analyze the current trends in the world of Pokémon research. While his paper was still gaining attention, he figured it would be a good time to capitalize on the momentum and publish another one. If the League noticed, he might even receive an official researcher's certificate soon, bypassing the need to go through the trainer registration process. As he scrolled, Johan casually asked, Gastly, do you enjoy training? Do you enjoy battling? Caw. Gastly, who had been rolling around on the floor, stopped and looked at Johan in surprise. But with the phone blocking its view, it couldn't see Johan's eyes. In truth, Johan had wanted to ask this question for a long time. When he first captured Gastly, he immediately started training it. Part of this was due to the pressure of being followed. Another part came from Johan's own subconscious belief that Pokémon were meant to be trained and to battle. But after spending so much time with Gastly, he suddenly realized he'd never asked for Gastly's opinion. After the Camerupt incident, Johan had come to understand that many Pokémon had simple desires. Some only wanted to enjoy happy times with their families and friends. Gastly, still holding a bottle of moo milk, floated over and gently patted Johan's forehead with its misty hand. Caw. No fever. Got your period? Johan's expression darkened. Caw. Laughing loudly, Gastly patted Johan on the shoulder, gazing dramatically into the distance. With my unmatched talent and limitless potential, should I spend my days at home breathing coal gas? Think bigger. Our goal is... Johan didn't let Gastly finish but got the message loud and clear. Sighing in relief, he replied, all right then, let's stick to the original plan. Double the training tomorrow. Caw. Gastly was shocked. Why do I feel like I just walked into a trap of my own making? Johan chuckled. Caw. Seeing Johan laugh so heartily, Gastly growled in frustration. Its body puffed up, and it lunged at him. Thud. Both Johan and Gastly tumbled to the floor. Stop. Don't lick. It's toxic. This time it's toxic.
Thanks for listening.